Did he have the legendary wrench that I've heard he has?
What's Dean got to do with it?
It's not really the dick, it's the ball. Blocked off the block. I knew I'd get it in, James.
Frankly, my dear,
I'm
I don't
fascinated
give
by
a
this whole
ding.
story. I'm
Coming in there with a two-finger cul-de-sac. I'm going to tickle them
getting
pink.
drunk.
And they're going to get a dose of Bonzi.
Yeah.
We drink during these shows.
To me, relationships are like a leash, and
Yours
and
didn't go well, right?
No.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Let's start right out. Hey, what happened?
Makes me laugh. Good morning. Hi. Afternoon. How is everybody? Welcome to the show. My name is Dean from the aforementioned Dean Blundell Show. As always, we've got my man Lachlan Cross from 95.7 Cruise FM is here. We've also got James DiFiore from blackballmedia.ca. Karima Saad will be joining us coming up in just a minute. And today's guest of honor, ladies and gentlemen, MPP here in Ontario. Please welcome Mr. Randy Hillier, ladies and gentlemen. Randy Hillier, let's give him a round of applause because he made time. How are you, bud?
It is wonderful. As I said, other than living under communism, life is good in Lanark County right now.
Yeah, it is. Hey, listen, I think it's cool that you decided to come on the show, and James deserves a ton of credit because he was like, let's get Randy on. And I'm like, dude, everybody thinks the guy's nuts. And so you just coming on because we've got very different opinions is important. And I wanted to preface the whole conversation with, I don't hate anybody. I want to have a conversation because there are so many different values that we represent in this country. And everybody's gone nuts. Everybody's gone psycho. No one's allowed to have a conversation. And I want to know how you got to where you are today. You probably don't want to know how I got to where I am because I'm just one of the lemmings that you speak of. But we also want to talk about safety. We want to talk about community. We want to talk about Canadians. We want to talk about the pandemic. And I want to talk about the rights and the freedoms of everybody to be able to live equally. So I appreciate you being here, Randy. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's wonderful to be on and have a conversation, and in a civilized conversation, and that's difficult to have in our country these days. I would say that we are living in a very sick society where if you don't conform, you are pilloried. It's not dissimilar to, I think, reading the history books of the Salem witch trials. Like if you are not fully conforming, then you are evil in Canada these days. And and I would just say everything that I say today and everything that I defend and promote today are the same things that I promoted over a year ago and 10 years ago. And what's changed? Why is it now that defending freedom and democracy and the rule of law is now vilified? But I look forward to the conversation, and I really think one of the important things to do with any conversation, guys, is that we at least understand what we have in common first. What are facts that are agreeable that we understand to be true, and then go off from there. And I think that's a good way to have a conversation about not just COVID, about anything that is controversial or disagreeable.
So that's a great starting point, Randy, is I want to know how you got to where you are, because you talk about being pilloried. You've been vilified as irresponsible, a conspiracy theorist, dangerous. Your opinion has been, largely not based in science, or at least the science that's widely acceptable by, the general public and medical professionals. how did you get here? How did you arrive at the conclusion that, according to a tweet that I read, last week, or maybe it was a week or two ago, and I found this interesting. I know people who mask and do it with the belief of doing so with respect and consideration of others, but the evidence is beyond reasonable doubt. There is no pandemic, never was. We were duped. Wearing masks perpetuates the falsehood and a lie. Shame all those who live the lie. How did you arrive at believing all of that?
Well, it's been over the course of a little more than a year, obviously. So some of the facts that lead me to that conclusion is, in Canada, and the Canadian numbers are not that dissimilar from most other jurisdictions, but in Canada, greater than 96% of all people who have died with COVID are seniors with existing comorbidities, and on average 2.5 comorbidities. So they were very sick and elderly people. Mm-hmm. We know that nearly 80% of all fatalities with COVID have occurred in our nursing homes, in our long-term care facilities.
Just got to stop you there. It's the number is actually 69% across Canada, and internationally the number is 41%.
It varies. That number has last summer it was 90%, but it's. The point is that a great many of people are elderly, who are at risk, are elderly and who are sick, very sick. You don't go into a long-term care for a long time generally. I think we can all agree with that. And also the average age of death is about 84, which is 2 years longer than our average life expectancy in Canada. So we know that those are some of the essential facts that who is at risk from COVID, and then you can throw in a bunch of other information, but we'll get into. I think that's a good starting point. That and I would say this, but when you look at the government orders and the impositions and the view of what needs to be done to counter those facts, all the measures are imposed on people who are not at risk, who don't fit those categories. Young children in school who the evidence is clear are not at risk. Business people, small businesses must be closed up, but large businesses are permitted to remain. They're safe.
I don't think anyone understood that, by the way.
No, I understand.
No matter if you believe. No, I get it. I get why people do it. I get the big business got to operate because of their relationships politically.
That's not the question. Is what does that have to do with saving people who are at risk in long-term care? What does that have to do with saving people who are at risk, who are frail and elderly and have comorbidities? That's the question. Not. But we're told that is a precaution, and it's a reasonable imposition. It's also reasonable to limit and ration our health care for all those other people who are not at risk. And we've seen this. Hundreds of thousands of people in need of medical procedures are not being done. In my question to the Minister of Health last June, she told us at that time that over 200,000 needed medical procedures were not done. So we have to look at the consequences of what we're doing, as well as the context of what we're doing things in. And
that's a fair statement, Randy. But is it also fair to suggest that there was an effort to try to save elderly people from COVID, and the fact that we kept the majority of the population relatively safe from getting COVID, it might have actually saved some lives of some older people, or do we just not care about the elderly?
No, I think the premise is not quite correct. And so we know that there was a study released, two studies released, one just a couple weeks ago by the Health Advisory and Recovery Team, an appendage of the UK Parliament, as well as a peer-reviewed study released by Wiley a couple weeks earlier that demonstrated when they did the study between two countries that had no lockdowns, as Korea and Sweden, as compared to 8 other heavily locked down countries, they found that there was no difference in the spread of the virus. No statistical or measurable difference in the spread. And I would say, yes, there was an effort done to protect people in long-term care. It failed miserably. It was not a very well conceived effort or executed effort.
Well, the government has to give a shit about long-term care for them to actually be effective in that area. And I think that the pandemic has uncovered the fact that the government really, specifically in Ontario, really didn't care about the health of our long-term care people.
They never have. We've had an acute problem in long-term care for as long as I've been in elected office. We've had a multi-year wait list to get into it. We've had an acute shortage of PSWs and healthcare workers in long-term care. None of this stuff was ever done. But then to compound the problem, we emptied our hospitals to protect our hospitals, and we moved 1,500 very sick people from our hospitals into an overcrowded long-term care system during the pandemic as well. In addition, we then told our long-term care facilities that if anybody developed any symptoms that were similar to COVID, like a cough, fever, etc., that they were not to be permitted to return to hospitals. So there's a lot of functions, a lot of decisions that were made, which in my view amplified the failings in long-term care, along with never doing anything to mitigate the problems that were there historical. And I would just add one other element into that. In October of 2019, the WHO released a pandemic plan. It's about 60 some pages in length.
Did you tweet it out the other day? I think you tweeted it out yesterday. Yeah, I read it.
And
it was from 2019.
It demonstrates clearly that non-pharmaceutical interventions, so mass social distancing, isolation, confinement, is not to be done the way that we've done it. It is to be done in a very, very targeted and slim and for a very diminished period of time. And the WHO has come out with that reassertion of that late last year, that lockdowns should be the very last resort and for a very short duration. And we've seen in Ontario, we've swallowed the lockdown hook, lock, stock, and barrel. And we think that is the only thing that we can ever do to combat the virus, where the pandemic plan doesn't say that whatsoever. We essentially threw out the plan and went into full hysteria mode in March of last year, and we haven't gotten out of it.
Randy, do you think that, and I know that you want to say that it is because it's your old party, but just as far as government messaging goes, what I've noticed is from the beginning, or at the beginning, that the WHO would release a press release, and then a couple hours later, our government would release a press release that was almost verbatim what the WHO released. And then in Ontario, about a half an hour later, would release a very similar looking press release. So when you talk about liberty and stuff, for a lot of people, it's keywords. It's like, oh, there's a crazy libertarian using the word liberty again. Don't tread on me and all that. But really, at the end of the day, when we look at that, why are we putting so much trust, one, into non-governmental entities? And is it possible to not put your trust into the World Health Organization because they're at the forefront of this pandemic in an international sense?
Well, I think there's a couple elements there, James, that are important to reveal and to understand. The public health bureaucracies are like any other bureaucracy. They're very hierarchical in their approach and their deference. So when when Mr. Tedros at the WHO says this is what we ought to do, we might as well just get rid of Dr. Tam, Dr. Williams, and every other public health, because that's what they're going to accept. Dr. Tam accepts the WHO message. Heaven forbid if Dr. Henry in BC or Dr. Williams in Ontario countered or did not subscribe to that hierarchical message. So it was just a one-size-fits-all from Tedros. Now, I don't think anybody's going to confuse Tedros as being an esteemed medical practitioner, let alone a public health practitioner. He's a rogue communist leader from Africa who is now in a UN position. And let's not forget that there was a lot of things being told to us in the West that were originating from China.
Sorry, Randy, do you know that Mr. Tedros is communist?
Oh, yeah.
He actually
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, is he? Okay. I didn't know.
Like African communism is probably different from like white people communism. To
Yeah,
be honest.
sounds like
It's
it.
way better.
Yeah, it probably is actually.
And also has quite a criminal background as well. But that's a different story.
Sure. All right.
But you can look on Google for that.
Okay.
Easily.
What,
Or on-
shoplifting?
Corruption and fraud charges. Really? No,
Okay.
Randy's telling the truth.
But listen, we were.
Don't let that flag in the background fool you. He's telling the truth here.
All right.
It's and for those who aren't aware, because I've had people question why I have that flag behind me, and apparently there's a lot of people in Ontario who don't recognize the Ontario flag. So anybody who's wondering what that flag is, it is not the UK Union Jack. It is the Ontario Red End. So,
Randy, listen, I love
stand
your
by my
flag.
comment about the flag.
Yeah, it's fine. I love your flag. But and we're talking about a bunch of different stuff here. We're talking about, pandemic response. We're talking about long-term care homes. And I want to kind of push that to the side for a second because, the tweet that I read earlier where you said the pandemic doesn't exist. The pandemic isn't a real deal. But then you talk about, the virus and preparedness, and you talk about the virus as if it's an active thing. So my question to you is, do you believe there's a pandemic? Do you believe COVID-19 is a thing? Because you repeatedly say it isn't, and you get into a lot of shit for that, right? Like Twitter banned you for 12 hours. You've had multiple warnings. I find it irresponsible, but I'm not you. So, do you feel the 22,900 dead Canadians are real? Do you feel like almost 1 million Canadians got do you find any of it to be existent or because you're kind of playing both sides if I'm doing the math in my head?
Well, the message is that it's exaggerated. First,
but you believe it exists.
Oh, of course. But I'll draw your.
Well, then why would you put this tweet out? This is just a question. Well, there's no pandemic and never was.
We have viruses every year, but they're not always pandemics.
But that was specific. You're talking about this one thing. You're talking about COVID-19, right?
So it's a virus, but it is not a pandemic.
You don't believe it's a pandemic?
No.
A lot of people aren't going to make that jump, Randy. They're not going to make that jump that you're suggesting they need to make in order to understand the message you're trying to bring to the people, which is, listen, we have a virus. People are getting sick. It's actually killing people, but this is not a pandemic. And by putting a tweet out like that, you got to understand what kind of energy you're bringing towards yourself, right?
So, listen, first off, and I'll draw your attention, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has done a marvelous job on this. They released a report for their court cases that they brought applications against these emergency orders in many provinces throughout the country. So they've released a very significant research paper on this called Flying Blind, where it lists all the mortalities, it lists all the missed medical procedures. It lays out a very strong evidentiary case about what are the facts. And we can see from that, along with many others, that our mortality has not been in excess in 2020. It's very much in keeping with the mortality rates that we have every year. keeping
with
in
the
mind-
flu.
We're keeping with all mortality, because I think Dean and James and Chris, everybody who died who had been tested positive COVID were listed as a COVID death. We can all there's been much evidence that shows that.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you had a heart attack. It doesn't matter if you had pneumonia. It doesn't matter if whatever you had. If you had been tested positive, you're listed as a COVID fatality. So, but our overall mortality rate did not change last year. It's in keeping with every other year.
Well, and hold it.
Let me just finish other part of
Pardon
that.
me. Yep.
One other part of that is our hospitalization rates. We know that our hospitalization rates are actually less in 2020 than in previous years. So I'll pose the question to you this way. Is it really a pandemic if not more people are dying, and if not more people are going to the hospital?
Mm-hmm.
I think the not more people going to the hospital thing is because we've been told try to avoid the hospital because we don't want further infection. But the other part, the flu part, I find interesting because someone sent me the data for, I don't know if it was Toronto or Ontario, but it was one of the two, of flu cases last year and the year before. And it's usually in the thousands or something, but last year it was like less than 100. So it makes me feel like those numbers were just swallowed by the COVID numbers. I don't know. Part of the problem, I think, is that
maybe it's people wearing masks.
Part of the problem is that we don't think
it is.
We don't have answers because we're not in this profession. And so we tend to believe, I think, government messaging more about this as a people, as a whole people, than we normally would give the government credit for. And I think because we're flying blind because we're not experts, we have to figure out who we trust. I think a lot of us feel like we don't trust anybody. And I'm one of those people, certainly, that feels like the more I read, the less I know, because there's so much contradictory information out there.
I think that's a good point, James. And I think that's part of what I said earlier about how sick our society has become. There is no requirement or no expectation for people to actually think or to critically examine the evidence on their own. That we are just some pawn on the chessboard that is to be bombarded with messaging, and that we just respond without actually thinking. And so what this all, I'll start out where I began to question the bombardment of fear that we were receiving, and that was in the middle of April last year. I, like everybody else, thought, okay, we're in a very uncertain, unknown period of time.
Did you lock down the first time?
Yes. I was never 100%. My family still came over. Close friends.
But you made it was the old college try for lockdown. Like you did lock down a little bit.
Well,
you did a little lockdown.
Yeah.
All right.
A little, somewhat, but
a light lockdown.
So,
there was still some light nudity,
like in the country where you don't lock your door. It was that kind of lockdown.
But you couldn't go to the pub on a Friday afternoon anyway. So, but anyway, I looked up. One of the things that happened during that time was, if you remember, there was a number of large passenger cruise ships sailing that were quarantined and isolated. One of them was the Diamond Princess.
For like 3 months. People were trapped on that thing for 3 months.
Yeah, and but
that's because they were hauling bodies off of it every week.
Well, that enough being on a cruise ship for a weekend.
No, but so listen to the facts here of the Diamond Princess. So it was over 4,000 people on that ship. By the time it was declared safe to land and disembark the passengers, 7 people had died. Okay, 7, not boatloads, not cartloads. 7 people, and there was 800 people who had tested positive for COVID, and all of the crew who were tested positive, who are, I think we can say in a general statement, probably in better health and younger than the passengers. None of them were sick or required hospitalization. And so it was very targeted. We could see, and that was like a controlled experiment. We could see how it actually, what was manifesting with COVID and I said, well, Jesus, this is not the apocalypse. This is, people quarantined, using the same utensils, using the same linens, using in small quarters, and 7 people. Now, that's
isn't that still bad though, Randy? Like, I hear you say only 7 people died and 800 infected, but we're not talking about long haul effects. Like, we work with a guy named Brent. Brent was patient like 23 in British Columbia, came back from Ireland, was diagnosed with it, hid in his basement for like 14 days, never had respiratory issues ever in his entire life. Now he's on 2 puffers and a steroid because he has long haul effects from it.
Yeah.
And the 7 dead, that's still 7 family members dead. And I heard you talking earlier about, and listen, I'm not going to take liberty with how you said it. You said that, and we arrived 69% of the people in Canada that died were in long-term care homes as a justification for not treating this like a pandemic. But that's still 14,000 souls that are gone from their families. Like those lives still matter. And if these mitigation efforts and these lockdowns didn't come into effect, it's scientifically proven, pardon the language, we'd be far more fucked than we are now. So how do you reason that?
Okay, let's not put words into my mouth. Let's not put words into my mouth. I never said I didn't care about those deaths. We were
but I know I didn't say that. I didn't say you didn't care. I'm saying they all matter, and only 7 is still 7 people. That's my point.
But let's have context as well. So we know it's not uncommon to have fatalities on cruise ships. Okay, and that's not to say that what I was trying to draw the distinction was, at that time, we were being told that this was the virus of the apocalypse, that 350,000 people were going to die in Canada, that 100,000 people were going to die in Ontario alone. And even with these great lockdown measures, Doug Ford said that we will have 18,000 deaths in Ontario. And none of that has borne out to resemble the truth or the facts.
Can I jump in here? I just want to add something, and I could be wrong, but I remember when this started, there was a conversation about the comparison of COVID to SARS because it is linked to SARS. And at the time, there was a great deal of concern based on the fact that, and again, I'm not exact on numbers, but I remember something along the lines that 1 in 10 people that contracted SARS died. 1 in 100 people now, as it turns out, that contract COVID perish. The infection rate of COVID is much higher than what SARS was.
3.5 times higher, according to the Canadian Journal of Medicine or something like that, CMNJ.
Was it not, at the front end of this, Randy, was it not a concern that if the mortality rate matched SARS, which we'd already dealt with back in late 2000s, that the COVID numbers would have been astronomical? Were they not basing their template and their decisions on that?
All the decisions were based, as best as we can determine, was from the best available science and knowledge at the time. What we now know is that the expectations and the models were highly exaggerated. And just to go back to your infection fatality rate, and you can check this out I put it out on Twitter today, there was another Lancet peer-reviewed study that was released, and I put it out on social media today, that demonstrates that the infection fatality rate for SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, is similar to the flu and is much less than the original SARS. So yes, we had this great fear that the infection fatality rate would be skyrocketed compared to previous viruses. But the truth is, and the facts are, that it has not turned out that way, and I'm thankful they are. And
well, hasn't it though? Like the truth is that's not true. In my understanding is that's not true.
Well, it hasn't matched SARS, is what he's saying.
And the reason why it's not true is because, as I pointed out earlier, like 23,000 people are dead in this country, and so we all agree that this is a problem, right? Like we all agree that this pandemic is a really serious fucking issue of our lifetime.
That's where we don't agree.
Okay.
So
just making sure.
Well, we know that we have the same mortality rate last year as previous years. Okay?
No, we didn't. No, the mortality rate is 4.5 times higher.
No.
And 2019, 2,100 people in Canada died of the flu. In 2019. In 2020, nobody died of the flu. 19,000 people died of COVID-19. So if 3,000 people died in 2019 of the flu and 19,000 people died of COVID-19 in 2020, it absolutely flies in the face of the facts that you say are facts.
But I think if I may just like
let me just clarify that, because
please.
We need to speak apples with apples. I said all cause mortality is the same, okay? And you're talking about flu and COVID. I'm saying the overall mortality rate is the same last year as the previous year. Now, and I also, as we said earlier, that everybody who was tested with positive who died were listed as a COVID fatality. That's an important distinction to understand. So that's where, is it a pandemic if the same amount of people die this year as last year?
Can I just say, like, reiterate that the one point that, because I don't think we accept it or we get angry at it. And that is the whole thing where if you have anything else and you have COVID, it's a COVID death. I mean, when I first heard that, I was also a little bit like, oh, that's very odd. And then you dig and you find out it's true. I feel like you guys are kind of dancing around that a little bit, because Randy on one hand thinks that, if I speak for you for a second, thinks that it might be a little disingenuous to count every single death if the person happens to have COVID, but also cancer and something else, that it's a COVID death. I understand that line of thinking. I think Dean's line of thinking might be the opposite of that, where it's like, but COVID is the thing that actually put them over the hill to make them die. But it's a philosophical question almost if you don't have the data. And
well, if COVID wasn't present, would those people have died?
Yes.
They would have.
Well, they had two terminal. A lot of them had 2.6. It's 2.5 pre-existing conditions, and I think that the math is something like 1.5 were terminal illnesses, right? So they have pre-existing conditions and terminal illnesses. Then they get COVID. So when someone has AIDS and they get pneumonia, I guess I don't know. I'm pretty sure they say they die of pneumonia, but we all know that it's because they had AIDS. Right? Like it's a similar sort of math that's being done.
Those are important nuances that are not part of the discussion with COVID, James. And I think it is, we know if we look at the average age is 84, and most of them are in long-term care, and most of them have significant comorbidities, I think we can all say, if you're in that state of health, it won't take much to put you over the edge, but you're not far from the edge to begin with. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important, did COVID expedite an earlier death in some cases? Very possibly so.
Well, they say all of them. Well, like when they announce that someone dies of COVID, they say if they had cancer and they had lupus, or if they were 90 and they already had pneumonia, but they also got COVID, they're saying that COVID, as James pointed out, is a trigger. And to kind of further what you were saying,
poor bastard.
Yeah, poor sucker. All those things. January to January. Sorry, I just want to address the COVID deaths. January, October 20th, there were an estimated 241,257 deaths in Canada. This is from StatsCan. I don't know if you believe the government anymore, Andy. I kind of do and I kind of don't. I believe this because it seems to make sense according to everything I've cross-referenced. Representing an excess of 10,090 deaths above and beyond what should have been expected if there was no pandemic. So I guess 10,000 extra dead people, right? And if we don't take those mitigation efforts, my opinion is that number is significantly higher, is it not?
Well, I think that's the conversation we need to have here, Randy, is because if we can all get on the same playing field, disregard our current belief structure about where we're at and why we're at and whether or not we did the right thing or the wrong thing. What you're saying is that this many people died. We've got this many people dead in Canada in 2020. In 2019, there was this many people that died. Now, what I want to hear somebody say that disagrees with whether or not we should be doing what we're doing or we did all the wrong things is what we did to negate the fact that we were trying to save lives. The measures that would that number have been higher, Randy?
Well, the two studies that I talked about, the health advisory and recovery team from the UK and the Wiley study, demonstrate that no, we wouldn't have had any difference in whether we locked down or not. We also have the Jay Batrea's recent study, and he's a professor from Stanford, that has come out and said the same thing, and in that the lockdowns and the measures that we've taken have caused greater deaths. Now, I don't know about the numbers that Dean just mentioned. I'll send
them to you. www.statscan.gc.ca. It was put out 2.5 months ago.
So I know in December when the Justice Center released that document, and it was using the statistics from Stats Canada at the time, it did not show any excess mortality. Now, so maybe things have, maybe they found some. I'm not going to comment on something that I haven't seen, but I will take a look at that. But there's two other pieces of evidence, three other pieces of evidence that I just mentioned that indicate and demonstrate that the lockdowns had no measurable difference in the spread of COVID. So
is this just in Canada or around the world, Randy?
That was UK. That was a study out of the UK, I think you're referring to, correct?
There's the three of them. They've all used studies from around the world. The Health Advisory and Recovery Team, you looked at and reviewed the studies in the literature from around the world as well. Okay. So, we're getting. I think we're getting a closer understanding of where do the facts lie. Now let's take a look at also what has been the cost, because that hasn't been discussed either. What has been the cost to our society in
human costs or economic?
All costs,
both.
Because we know a significant determinant of public health is economic well-being, our standard of living. We know that access to healthcare is a strong determinant of public health. We know that a well-educated population is a strong determinant of public health. All these things, all these important contributing factors to good public health have been significantly harmed in the last year. Mm-hmm. And nobody to this day, over a year after implementing these measures, no government, no public health body has done a cost benefit or an analysis of, did we cause more harm than good?
These are like questions that you require like a philosopher's doctorate to answer, because from the beginning,
I read a lot of Stoicism. Can I help with that or no?
You probably could.
And he listens to jazz.
Yeah, I love jazz.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Dan Rogers.
But if you start from the beginning, China controls data, and then China doesn't give out data to scientists around the world. It takes like whistleblowers to find that data. So immediately this tree is poisoned with this fruit, where you can't get the data. And then we fast forward to the conversation that you guys are having right now about what are the extra, the ancillary negative impacts that we're experiencing because of mental health, for one. How do we calculate these numbers? I mean, you need a mathematician. You need a mathematician and a
it's gonna take years, dude.
Yeah,
it's gonna take years. Like, we won't find out how bad things are. And Randy asked a great question, and makes a good point. And as do you. Like, how do you figure out in this melting pot of how fucked we are in this time, what the biggest costs were, and did we do it right? We haven't been through a pandemic in 100 years, so we're gonna figure that out, post-mortem.
So that's my opinion. So when I see you and Randy talk about this, though, I find myself sort of agreeing with both of you, even when you contradict each other. And the reason why is because for real, because the reason why is because the truth is
no one asked.
No, we have no idea. So we don't know. So we're basing our answers on our belief systems, not our data, because we don't have any data.
So I want to hear Randy's point here. Randy wants to say something here.
So this is important because we know, our country's been a representative democracy for, getting close to 200 years. And we know that there's ways and processes on how to deal with crises and problems. And they've been very successful for a long, long time. And that is that you have members of a legislative body who are elected by their constituents come to a forum where we can bring forth our understanding, have a discussion, have a debate, consider the evidence from various perspectives, examine experts in a committee room, and make determinations as best we can.
Mm-hmm.
We've done away with that whole process. And the legislative bodies, whether federal or provincially, have had no involvement in COVID whatsoever. We have had a unelected, unaccountable body of public health people making determinations and decisions. And we can't even see what evidence they're looking at, let alone what their examination or analysis is. And as Doug Ford said last week, any political person who dissents from public health would be committing political suicide. It would be akin to putting a rope around your neck and throwing yourself off the bridge. But I'm going to say to everybody, if we don't allow or permit that deliberative process to happen and to encourage it and facilitate it, we will never know what the cost of our measures were. We will never know if we did things rightly or wrongly. But right at the moment, we know that we're not even allowed to discuss it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not.
That's fair.
It's not, and it is, because governmental agencies are run by the administration, which runs that actual agency, right? It runs the government. So my understanding, because of where I came from and how I kind of process information, I want to find out how much of what you believe is connected to faith. Like, is because you hang around with Reverend Henry Hildebrand because you share like-minded views. Saw a picture of you with the barbecue guy. Guaranteed he doesn't go to church. But what role has faith played in how you feel about what you believe when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, I think the most essential part of that, and that's a big question, and I don't know if I'd be able to answer it fully, but I'd answer it this way, Dean. I have long understood never to have faith in government. Right?
Why are you in politics then?
Well,
you got to break it from the inside, Dean.
No. Listen, we have safeguards in politics. We have checks and balances on government because we know without constraints, governments will behave poorly. That's why we have courts that are independent from government. That's why we have a legislative body that is independent from the executive council. That's why we have the Supreme Court. That's why we have public institutions and we have demands for transparency and accountability, because if government does not have those constraints and safeguards on it, it will behave badly. And so,
and that wasn't the question that I asked, with all due respect. I said, what role does your belief in God play in your belief in what's really going on with COVID? Because I see it from the born again Christian community, the deeply spiritual community. They believe that these are end times, and the vaccine is the mark of the beast. Do you believe that?
No, not, I have faith in Jesus Christ and God, right? I don't have faith in government. I have confidence in mankind to look at a problem and have the strength and the courage and the resolve to face that problem and to resolve it. That's fundamental to me, and I think that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do.
But isn't that a fair statement, though, to say that, like, your faith has a whole lot to do with what you believe to be right and wrong when it comes to science?
Oh, no, faith has a great deal of what's right and wrong with morality. That's very different than what's right and wrong in science. So, science is a set of charts and data and tabulations and
definitive information.
And I think what's important is that, and we can all look at numbers. You don't need to be a Harvard-educated individual to look at at numbers, or to examine things like the Diamond Princess. And most people have that capacity and ability to do so. What I believe is that people have placed so much faith in government that they've lost sight of their own responsibility to think for themselves and to act critically on that.
I agree. We don't question government enough. But again, doesn't religion play a massive role in what you have chosen to tell people you believe? Doesn't it? Like, it has to. It does. I know it does. And I can see it because I see it in Christian circles. I grew up in a born-again Christian home with all the wackos. And I went to, and all of those people.
Not that you're a wacko.
Not that you're a wacko. But all of those, I'm calling those people, I grew up with wackos, but all of those people, to a man, if they still believe it, their eternal salvation counts on them not believing that this virus is real, number one, or getting the vaccine because they all say it's the mark of the beast. Now, listen, I can get into apologetics. We can talk about religious policy and all that stuff. Not that I'm overly schooled, but I remember enough that I'm really mad about all that shit, because science is determinative. Like, science will tell you exactly what you need to know down to the decimal point. And I believe that. I don't believe that the vaccine is the mark of the beast. I believe in, community kindness and being a good individual. So I do wear the mask, whether or not I want to, or I believe the government's full of shit, which I completely agree with you. They are. But, the narrative that the religious portion or the faith portion, I find to be incredibly dangerous.
Well, I don't. Listen, does faith play a part? Of course, all of us as human beings are biased based on what, our beliefs, our values, on our perspectives, on our experiences, our observations. We're all biased in some fashion. There's no such thing as an unbiased individual unless you're a bloody robot.
Or an atheist.
Even like,
or Buddha.
We all have biases. That's unquestionable.
But isn't that bias right now during a pandemic kind of dangerous, though, Randy?
No, I have a bias towards freedom. I have a bias towards democracy.
But what happens if that freedom impinges on my freedom? Like, there's a cost to that libertarian thinking.
There is no cost to this libertarian thinking at all.
Sure there is.
Well, no, because, again, let's take a look at the Great Barrington Declaration. Let's take a look at the WHO pandemic plan. Let's take a look at Professor Jay Batrea's recent story. Like, we now know, contrary to the belief at the beginning of this, that that healthy people or asymptomatic people could spread the disease. Well, that's been thoroughly debunked. We know that is not
Hold on,
true
has that?
anymore. Yeah, it has. We know at best, masks are ineffective. They may have some. The Danish randomized control study came out that they could not determine if there was any benefit from wearing masks. And
yeah, that's not true though. But that's not true. The benefit to the wearing the mask, according to every major medical body across this planet, says not only does it doesn't prevent all infections, it mitigates you possibly getting infected. And what's more is if you are asymptomatic, it prevents you from spreading the disease as well.
But okay, can I just jump in quickly, Randy?
Yeah.
I want to ask a question that I ask a lot of people that I have this type of conversation with. And the funny thing is, and I think that all four of us would be willing to agree, that surprisingly, if you knew about my stance on this and James's stance and Dean's stance individually, and we knew about yours, Randy, I think you'd be surprised that we have found as much common ground in the discussion that we've had so far. Yeah. I think anybody that knows me would be surprised that I'm maintaining a civil conversation with you, Randy.
I like everyone in this call except James.
I would agree with that. I don't even like myself.
Listen, that's a good point, Lachlan.
Yeah, but hold on. I do have a question. So when I get to a certain point, like a crossroads like this, and I have friends that are on various levels of the belief structure of where we're at and whether or not we made mistakes. And the thing is, we can all agree that at some point, somebody's going to have to figure out what we did wrong and maybe fix some of the things that we did wrong if this happens again, because the lockdown, we probably didn't handle that right. So we're all on the same page. It sucks, and
we all agree.
Mistakes.
Whether or not we think it's right, it sucks, right?
But
it blows.
The problem I have is if there was some sort of plan to do this on purpose, which is you keep alluding to that.
No,
that
not,
this was
not once.
I haven't heard it.
I never said that at all.
Yeah, well, I've never heard that either.
I get the sense from my sort of research of you is that there is some plan behind the scenes that that's
bullshit.
Okay. All right. Then
you
that's
just got
fault.
told, Locke.
That's my fault, Randy. Because I wanted to find out why. If there's not an answer to why, are there conversations about what we did wrong and how to fix and move to that next level?
That's a good point, Lachlan. And what I was going to say is that, we need to have that conversation. And as much as you just said that, we've gotten far more common ground than you thought we were going to find today, but we're not having the discussions. Everybody presupposes. As soon as I'm going to share this little story. I retweeted last year a tweet that had Robert Kennedy Jr. and Alan Dershowitz had a debate on vaccines. I listened and watched that debate, and I thought it was an intelligent, good conversation about mandatory vaccines. I retweeted it. Immediately, I was labeled as an anti-vaxxer because I retweeted something from RFK Jr. This is the state of the sickness of our society that we're in. Mm-hmm. It's that we impugn people's motives at every opportunity. There is no charity when there's any conversation. You have a different view, and therefore you must be fucking evil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you're evil. I don't. I think that you've arrived at how you think and what you believe by virtue of the life that you've led, and then you've taken the stance that you've taken because it is what you believe, and that's allowed.
Yeah,
like that's 100% allowed. Yeah. But when it comes to where we're at, everybody's so sick, right? Everybody's unwell, and we have this thing running around we can't see or control. We talked a lot about whose fault it is are the mitigation efforts working? But I guess the biggest question I have, because we talked about vaccines, if you're not an anti-vaxxer, which you were labeled one and you're not, I guess, do you plan on getting the vaccine?
So listen, I've had lots of vaccines in my life.
Yeah, we're all here because we had them.
And my kids have had vaccines. And I've known throughout my history that to develop a safe and effective vaccine, it takes many years. I don't believe that you can create a safe and effective vaccine in months. Okay. And so, no, I will not be taking this vaccine because the threat or the risk to me from COVID is not very high. It's not very, and if I did get it, I probably might not feel well for a few days, but I am not going to have something put into me, which is, and as we saw with today's announcements with AstraZeneca's vaccine, when you rush things, don't be surprised that you screw things up a little bit and you don't get them right. So AstraZeneca now is not to be given to people under 55 and not to be given to people over 65 in this country.
I think that's an over caution. What I think that.
Yeah, because I think 340,000 people in Canada have gotten the vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and not one issue.
20 other countries have suspended its use as well.
Yeah,
so, overcautious, I think.
Okay, call me overcautious then. Okay,
so
yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so and that's totally. But why not? Why not be overcautious with masking? If you're going to be overcautious and not get the vaccine, why not be overcautious and say, hey, yeah, I believe COVID exists, which you have said on this show, you believe it exists. Why can't we be overcautious in that department? Is it about freedom?
Well, there's two things I think that are important in that regard. The first one is when I look at the evidence and when I look at the studies and the data, I come to the conclusion that masks are largely ineffective and that healthy people cannot spread the virus. Okay, so that's my premise.
Okay.
So, but when somebody wears a mask, what you are telling everybody, whether you recognize this or not, you're telling everybody,
I like you. That's what they're saying. I like you, and I'm not going to make you sick.
What they're telling you is that they believe that they are a danger, that they are a vector of transmission for the virus, and that they believe that every other person is a vector of the transmission of the virus. And then, therefore, these lockdowns and these impositions on freedom are justified because we are all dangerous to one.
What does it say when you don't wear a mask, Randy?
It says that it can say a number of different things, because all our public health orders permit and allow for an exemption for various reasons. Okay, medical, psychological. There's a number of different exemptions.
Religious is one of the things too.
So
that's where we all disagree. I think all that's a little.
But I think what I think it does say to people is, you're not fearful of the virus, and that you've come to a conclusion that other people aren't dangerous either.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think that that's a statement that's coming from your narrative, though? Because you with the people that wear masks, you said that I'm a danger to you and you're a danger to me. Dean started to say it, I think, but what I would say is that when I wear a mask, I just want everybody else to just feel cool about
comfortable
coming into their store.
Yeah,
really. And I think most people sort of feel that way.
And if I see somebody not wearing a mask, I'll say it. I think they're a dick.
And if you see people that don't wear a mask, you have people like Lachlan, we'll call him a dick. Really, at the end of the day, when you don't wear a mask in a grocery store and then people with masks surround you to yell at you,
they're tools.
Who's the bad guy? Who's the bad guy in that situation? It's the people surrounding you because they can, according.
I'll tell you who the winner is. The guy I saw today with a hole in the front of it, and he was smoking a dart at a bus stop.
If it was Randy, that might have been.
He had a hole right in front of his mask.
I want to bring.
He was hacking a dart.
Let me just say two things to that. One is that I did a little It's not a scientific survey or anything, but I put a little survey out. I asked people, why do you wear the mask? Are you fearful of the virus, or are you fearful of a confrontation with others or judgment by others? And fully 90% of the people who 90% of the people said they don't want to have the confrontation. They don't want to be shamed by others. Only 10% thought that the virus was a danger to them.
Those are your followers, though.
Well, I as I said, it's not scientific. But I think most of, and as James just said, and I think others have, people don't want to have the confrontation. People don't want to assert their freedom and make other people uncomfortable, and so there's a high degree of compliance of that. But I would ask the three of you to.
And what's wrong with that, though, Randy?
Well,
what's wrong with being compliant, and what's wrong with not wanting to have a fight in front of the tomatoes at Safeway?
Let me finish my thought, because there's nothing wrong with not wanting to have a fight. Okay, that's typically we're a very agreeable, peaceful, orderly society. We've always have been. But I will say to everybody that I have seen a very significant growth in vitriol, in animus, and indeed hatred. And we're seeing many examples of people calling in and snitching on their neighbors because somebody may have too many people over at their house, and we saw videos of people being tackled by store employees and handcuffed for not having a mask. And
those videos play huge online, by the way. I get a ton of clicks on those.
But those things are also ideological. Those things are also ideological too. That mixed messaging, because if you remember last summer, people were getting arrested for having barbecues with a dozen people in their backyard, while 500 people were gathered in Ontario or in Ottawa for a Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah. So all I'm getting at there is, I think there is another element of these lockdowns and these COVID measures that are going largely unseen and not examined. Mm-hmm. And I find it very disturbing what's happening to society. That, I had a lady call me up and wanted me to take action because she saw three girls walking together, not 6 feet apart, on a country road in my riding. And I said to her, said, well, maybe they all live together. And it was immediately, no, there's no way they could be living together. They're all the same age. And this is where I go back to that we're not being very charitable to people. I've talked to women who find wearing a mask to be so traumatic because they've been raped and they've been suffocated. And the very idea of having something over their face causes them to have significant anxiety. And we don't care about that trauma that person has had. Mm-hmm. We are uncharitable to these people. It's either it's all or nothing. You're either good if you wear a mask or you're evil if you don't, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. Again, it's nice to be able to have a difference of opinion on serious stuff, but at least find some common ground. Is that we have used this to become worse people, right? We've used this to hang collars of reputations that other people don't deserve around their necks. But largely because people are fucking scared, Randy. And I want to bring in Kareem Assad, activist lawyer as well. She's been covering a bunch of these freedom rallies around the country. You've been listening, Karima. We're trying to represent all sides of this, have a decent conversation about this. What are your thoughts? Love to hear from you now.
Well, I mean, just on that last point about the vitriol that emerges, and one of my observations at the various rallies, and this is downtown Toronto, there's a very strong contingency of people who are yellow vesters and otherwise align themselves with white supremacist narratives. And I'm just wondering, how do you sort of align with that, given your stance?
Randy, over to you.
Well, I've never attended a Saturday demonstration in Toronto. I've had my own demonstrations in Toronto. you know, I think.
But you get a lot of white supremacists out to those things. Karima wants to know why.
Well, I don't know. I've never been to those demonstrations, but I think that's a comment, and I'd ask you to consider this: is that not just really the part of one of the problems that we're talking about? Is we characterize somebody. I don't know what about yellow vesters, and I've never worn a yellow vest, and I don't know of anybody who has worn a yellow vest, but I wouldn't be discriminatory against them because somebody had a yellow vest on any more than if somebody was wearing suspenders or a tie.
I think honestly that was a little bit hyperbolic to ask him that question, because you look at a guy like Glenn Greenwald in the States, he's a gay lefty who gets called a Nazi just because he appears on Fox News and because some right wingers agree with him that the Russian thing was a conspiracy.
I don't think it's hyperbolic at all. So I'm speaking to my experiences at these demonstrations and at some of the feedback that I get.
Well, you've been at those demonstrations. I haven't been, so am I to characterize?
Karima's got a point. I think.
Right, but is there something to interrogate where your stance is so appealing to these swaths of folks who hold these other views, and in fact, there's a very strong overlap from my observation.
The freedom point of view, Karima, is that what you're talking about?
It's just a libertarian. It's a common ground based in libertarianism. It's a common ground based in libertarianism.
But there's an overwhelming number of people from that side that represent that portion of society that end up at these marches.
Right,
is
like
what Karima is trying to say.
Like saddling
that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's like saddling Jagmeet Singh with the fact that like there might be a few militant Antifa guys who have no problem taking out a conservative because
I don't think that's the same thing at all.
Yes, so you're telling me. I just want to know. You're insinuating. This bothers me.
Let her explain herself. Let her explain herself.
Go ahead, explain yourself.
Yeah. And if we look at sort of the data in which communities are bearing the brunt of COVID, it's very clearly racialized communities. And
what
so there does
yellow vesters at a rally.
That's an important point. The lockdowns have had a far greater disproportionate impact on racialized communities and lower income communities. There's no question about that's a truth.
And that's a fair question. And it's also fair on Karima's part to suggest that if your narrative online or whatever, if your persona draws a large percentage of that group towards you, how do you rationalize that, Randy? And I mean, that was I wanted to touch on the reset, because I've seen you comment on that, and I've seen your name attached to that as well. And you dodged that bullet quite quickly. But that's the part of the conversation that I think we're skirting here right now, is that we might be at odds on a number of issues, or we might be on the same page on a number of issues and agree with a lot of things that we've discussed today. But at the end of the day, we're still wildly apart on a number of things. And the idea is that we got to get, I don't know, we're so divisive. There's too many people in this media circle, the world that we live in right now in Canada and in North America, that are avoiding conversations like this because they don't want to inflame anything. And you just can't have conversations anymore. We avoid topics on my radio show because I'm worried about inflaming things. That's dangerous.
I don't avoid anything. I have never, ever seen any display of white supremacy or racism at an anti-lockdown demonstration. Now, have I gone to them all? No, I haven't. But I have never once seen any display of that. So I questioned the premise of that.
One of the leading sort of anti-maskers, Chris Sky, like he has demonstrable ties to some of these groups, and that kind of bleeds into his following. So I mean, to say that you haven't seen it, so you can't comment on it, is that not a trend that you think is valid?
Listen, freedom is something that a lot of people like, and they may have a lot of different biases. Just like democracy is something that a lot of different people and races like as well. So let's not be surprised that now Chris Guy has not been at my demonstrations, and I have not been doing interviews with Chris Guy. So I don't know the guy really.
I wouldn't if I were you. It's not going to help.
But that, but let's not marginalize somebody, or cast this broad net, and say because Chris Guy likes something that I like, then I and Chris Guy or somebody may have a racial bias who also likes freedom or who might also like left-wing politics. So Naomi Wolf, one of the great left-wingers of society, is opposed to lockdowns. Her and I think very much alike against lockdowns. So does that mean that I like everything that Naomi Wolf likes? No. Does she like everything that I like? No. We're different human beings, but we find common ground.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic teachings and philosophy, but I'm pretty sure he killed his wife. You know what I mean? Like, there are lots of things that we can find common ground in, right? But at the same time, you talk about Chris Sky, and I have no common ground with that guy. You talk about some of the people that you've discussed who want their freedoms and look at this like it's a freedom rally, or look at it like they should be allowed at any cost to everybody else to be able to act the way they want to act. And during a pandemic, Randy, with all due respect, that's what I was referring to, that comes at a great cost, right? You want your freedoms in a time when there are a lot of real sick people. We've gone over the numbers. I'm sourced to the nuts. I get it. We all get it. But during this time of suffering, is it not incumbent upon everybody that is in government, specifically elected officials like yourself, to be able to do what is right for the whole and still hold the same views you have? Listen, I get it if you don't want to wear a mask. I'm of the opinion that I don't really give a shit if anybody wears a mask anymore because I'm wearing mine. So I'm good with it. I'm happy to wear mine. And I never go after people in grocery stores who don't wear them. As a matter of fact, going back to that Chris Sky thing, the reason why those guys go to grocery stores and make videos or go to the airports and make videos is to be a public nuisance, right? The things that we're seeing from both sides, specifically what we're talking about here, people who don't believe that the virus is legitimate. They don't believe that they should have to succumb to any PCR tests. They don't believe that they should be a part of the human response. Is that not the most fucking anti-Canadian perspective to have in the world? Like, it seems to me it is. And here's why. Because we all agree there's a pandemic, except you. But you believe there is a COVID-19 issue out there. Is it not a lot easier for people and leaders like yourself to be able to say, hold it, guys, whether or not I believe this to be true or whether or not I grew up, I'm going to put on a mask, or I'm going to be responsible with this medical information and still be able to say to people, but let's think critically instead of taking that hard line? Because listen, Randy, it cannot be a ton of fun to be you right now.
Oh, I always have fun.
I saw that when you lit up the smoke in your office. I'm like, that is a guy that likes life.
Listen, I think that was a very blunt and not completely factual characterization. Right? I think as you said that, we all ought to be doing this, in that if somebody isn't wearing a mask, that's being un-Canadian, and it was a blunt characterization.
I said, shouldn't we be doing that on behalf of people in this country who are susceptible to getting sick a lot easier than us, people who have cancer? We don't know the people that we walk by or go to the grocery store with or go to No Frills and not wear a mask. We don't know what they got going on at home. You don't know if someone's grandma's sick, if someone's kids got leukemia and they're already predisposed to dying early anyway.
Absolutely.
And just to pick up on that, like we talked about people dying who were not far from the edge, but even where that's true, to sort of go and push someone off the edge, I agree with what Dean's saying, that, as a society, and we fail on this in multiple ways, and we've failed the disabled community horribly during the pandemic. But the notion that what we ought to be doing is collective action, and that seems to be a bone of contention here, and it's characterized as a matter of freedom. But I don't think that that's a fair characterization.
Don't some people call it being Christian?
Well, part of that is also to be tolerant and accommodating for others, and we're not being tolerant and accommodating of people with disabilities. We know we're not being tolerant and accommodating of and recognizing the dangers that's happening to our racialized communities and our impoverished communities, and all that. We're still not looking at what are the dangers. When I get constituents calling me and whose young children are living in fear and terror that they're going to bring a virus home and potentially kill their brothers and sisters or kill their moms and dads, and these kids are terrified, and we're saying, well, just put on your mask and continue to live in fear. Like, I think one thing that we all ought to recognize, that nobody should ever live in fear. Fear is something that should only be experienced on a spontaneous and temporary moment in time. And what we've done to society in the last year is we've instilled fear. We have induced and cultivated fear every day, all day.
But isn't this scary?
And that
isn't this scary, Randy? Isn't this scary?
How much damage is that doing? And should we not consider what that damage is? And is there not better ways to deal with this pandemic or virus than instilling fear? And fear is an irrational state. And that's what I fear we have in Canada now, is an irrational state, and nobody in public health, nobody in government dares bring forward a thought that we can do something differently other than to continue the narrative of fear.
But isn't it scary? Isn't this a scary time that we live in? Is this?
No, it is not.
It's okay. Well,
No, I'm not scared.
I know you're not scared because I follow you on Twitter. I read your stuff.
People that come over to my house are not scared. I have piles of people that come to my house. I have piles.
You might not want to be saying that on him.
No, he doesn't care.
No,
he gives no shits.
I don't give a shit. It is my house. I get to decide who comes in my house, not Christine Elliott or Doug Ford. It's not their house. And
agreed.
And if people choose to come over, if others choose not to live in fear, and they decide willingly, without coercion or without being compelled to come, then they're welcome to come. Okay, and they make the choice.
Can I smoke in your house?
Yeah, he does.
Pardon?
Can I smoke in your house, Randy?
I do.
Hey, you can't, Lachlan.
Do you get living in fear though? Like, so your position then is that there is no threat, because fear is a response to threat. And I agree that fear deployed as a tactic by government in order to enforce compliance, that's a short-sighted approach, and one that I think is ultimately going to be ineffective. But you look at countries like South Korea, where there's a high buy-in rate to and it's maybe a function of being a less individualistic society. I don't know. But do you think there's a threat or not?
South Korea didn't lock down.
Right, because there was high levels of compliance with the masking, with the distancing. There was a communal approach. And I think that.
No, but to answer your question, Karima's citing buy-in from a country that everybody took the mitigation efforts seriously. Sweden, they went with the herd community. You mentioned them earlier. They're now suffering an outbreak that's worse than anything per capita that's happening in the United States or Canada because of the second wave. Now we have these variants. 67% of all hospitalizations right now, 67% are with this B117 variant. It's not over by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It is here, and it is getting worse yet again. So I absolutely, with exactly what Karima said, like, the information that you give out, saying it's an alternative opinion, of which I understand. Like, I completely get it. but you're turning people away from that buy-in process when you have the perspective that you have.
Well, listen, so right now in Ontario, we have 400 people in ICUs out of ICU beds. We have over 2,000 ICU beds. We have 800 people in hospital in 25,000 bed capacity. Our hospitals are not overwhelmed by any measure. Okay, as far as we're going to have continued variants. Okay, that's what viruses are. They continually mutate and evolve, and that's why we've always had different influenza shots every year. Respiratory viruses mutate. Are we going to stay locked down, destroy our economy, destroy the social determinants of health, destroy our standard of living, and live in fear? Is this the only solution that reasonable and rational people can bloody well come to?
Randy, are your tactics working though? Like, what would your plan be? Like, how are you trying to make a difference in the position that you hold right now outside of Twitter?
People who are at risk should have added precautions. Okay, so if you're in long-term care, I think there is a reasonable approach is that you have people who are working in long-term care to be certain that they're not carrying viruses back and forth to other places, right? That would be one thing for certain. There's a whole host of other measures that could be done, whether or not we would be, and I think there'd be a lot more measures that could be considered if we were allowed to actually have a discussion or debate about it.
Who's stopping you from having that discussion, though? Well, like, I'm curious as to why have you been shut out of any discussions on your level politically based on your stance?
So if you'll remember, the back in March of last year, Ford and every other premier in the country enacted emergency legislation that took the deliberations away from the legislature. Okay, that
was a state of emergency.
And that even though the state of emergency was rescinded in July, all COVID measures and discussions are removed from our legislative bodies. Okay, that's why every day Doug Ford can come out, or Cruella DeVille, or
you don't miss an opportunity, big fella,
or Dr. Whoever, they can come out and make a pronouncement that this is the law today, because the legislature no longer has a role in the development of public policies. Right?
I think that's you guys. I think it's interesting is that I feel like you guys do have a lot of common ground and are a little bit talking past each other. But the main point of contention is that Dean is sort of like, why wouldn't you just do what the government tells you to do in this particular case, which flies right in the face of any libertarian philosophy? You just said that, right? Like
you said, I said, why wouldn't you just do why wouldn't you do the community thing? You know what I mean? Like, I understand what you're saying. Well, I think I said the words community, but whatever. Let's just go past that and get to the point. The point is that my initial intention was to say, listen, if you're going to go that far to try and understand the other side of this, why wouldn't you just throw on a mask? You know what I mean?
That's what I think. What I'm saying is that why don't you just do the one thing that the core of your political body says you shouldn't do, right? And so, but the details matter, and I think Randy's details right now are kind of important. We all just sort of get a little glassy-eyed when we realize that the government could do anything they want right now, because we would just be like, okay.
And they are.
And I think that's a little bit of a problem. I'm not with Randy all the way on what he's saying in regards to this pandemic. I do think it's a pandemic. I think it's kind of a mild one. I know a lot of lefties and progressives who thought that we should have only been targeting the sick and the elderly a year ago, and so we have all these questions and we're never getting answers. And so I think
we already decided we didn't care about the old people.
But it's also, no, we never decided that, but we also need to realize that we keep on talking from our sides as if we have this certainty when we really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really just retreating back to what we think is the safest.
Yeah, but
right?
the certainty is that, and we've all established it, right? That this is real. It's really happening. There is a real COVID virus that is killing people unjustly, and it's making a lot of people sick, and it's stealing family members. As Joe Biden puts it, a lot of empty chairs around the Thanksgiving table. Whether you like Joe Biden or not, I don't care, because it doesn't matter to me. But that's the human cost of it, right? And we talked about the human cost of those libertarian views, and it's interesting to me that libertarians focus exclusively on their individual freedoms, but it really always comes at the cost of the negative externalities of the freedom of the whole.
No, Dean, that's a mischaracterization.
I don't think it is.
Well, you mentioned one part of the equation, the people who have died, but you didn't mention the harm and the consequences to those others. There, let's recognize that there is an explosion in suicides. Let's recognize the despair and the huge increase in mental health and depression and anxiety and
domestic abuse.
And let's recognize, the loss of education for our kids, and let's recognize the loss of medical procedures for others. So, yes, there is a virus. I don't believe that the evidence demonstrates it's a pandemic, nor do I believe it demonstrates that lockdowns are a solution. I think that they are making matters far, far worse.
I think one of the issues too is that when I have a conversation with somebody about where we're at, it revolves around the fucking mask. And they're mad that they got to wear a fucking mask into a liquor store. And it's not about the mental health side of things. And that's never the focus, because that is something that I have said out loud numerous times in the last year. At what point are we going to start having a conversation about the impact that the lockdown is having on the community? And I am not an anti-masker. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe that I need to wear a mask to go get Budweiser. I wish I had one right now, if I'm being totally fucking honest with you.
So do I.
But nobody is having that conversation. How do we move, whether or not, Randy, you and I will ever sit down and have a beer and a smoke together in your backyard? That's beside the point. How do we get to the point where we get our public officials to start recognizing that there needs to be that conversation? Because you've already been put in your box. I'm not sure you're the guy that's going to be able to get people to have that conversation, Randy. Everyone has established you, and they put you in, they characterized you as this. You're that guy. How do you get out of that? And how do you get people to start having the conversation about the impact the lockdown has had on other parts of society?
Wear a mask.
I don't care if somebody puts me in a box.
I know you don't. I'm just saying, how do you get you're telling me the important part of this conversation is that we need to have a talk about what the other impact of the pandemic is. How do we get there? You need to be, you're a member of parliament. You have to be the guy that gets us there. You have to be at least part of the solution.
I've been trying.
And how do we get there where behavior is prolonging the pandemic? Arguably, if we're looking at countries that have more or less opened back up, they had a strong and fast and actual lockdown. We've had a half-assed lockdown across the country, I think, and it's indefinite, and that makes the strain on mental health very difficult, almost impossible to bear. So yes, there are those implications, but then when you have a faction of society that is deliberately, unwittingly prolonging the issue, how do we deal with that?
Because all those people, whether or not, listen, everybody comes to how they believe through different avenues, right? And I don't want to misrepresent everybody that doesn't want to wear a mask or doesn't think this is a pandemic. But like what we're trying to accomplish here is how do we start having a conversation where like you said earlier, people get vilified or put in boxes or treated poorly because of their opinion, whereas shouldn't your job be, as Lachlan said, to bring some safety or bring an idea of calm to the equation, and then say, okay, I believe this, they believe that. How do we come in the middle to do what's right for people and move past all the bullshit?
Well, listen, if I knew the answer to that, I'd utilize. Yeah, but I I think that goes back to what we said at the beginning, Dean, and we have a very sick society, and that's not going to be resolved overnight, and it's not going to be resolved by one person or four people or five. But I think we need to have the conversation about that first. When is it going to be permissible in this country for people to have an opinion that doesn't conform? Okay. When are we going to, we have a thing in Parliament. We're never very good at it, but we have a rule in Parliament that you should not impugn motive, that you should be charitable to when people have an opinion in a conversation. And
but don't you find the anti-masking motive dangerous right now when all available information says we need to protect each other from it?
Listen, if you keep defaulting into that position, Dean, we'll never have that conversation about how sick our society is and why we can't have a conversation. Right? Like, let's get beyond the anti-masking and the anti-vaccine and the anti-conspiracy and the conspiracy and all the other bullshit. Okay? And let's just have a talk. Are we doing things well? Are we protecting those who are at risk, and are we harming those who are not at risk?
I think it's also worth pointing out that if the most progressive stood up and tried to have that conversation about the ancillary harms, that it would also probably just be rejected or ignored. If you remember last year when it came out, every news outlet was calling it the Wuhan virus. And then like overnight, some dude just decided that was racist. And then, of course, the hard right ran with it and just made fun of people by continuing to say it. Now we got the UK strain, which I guess isn't racist. We have all these rules in place, the way we talk about this, about this pandemic. And none of those rules are able to, like they were telling us at the time when we had General Spalding on, remember, Dean? And he was talking about how it's possible that this virus came from a lab. Well, shit, at the time when you said that, you were a racist. You weren't thinking about what you're supposed to be thinking about. And lo and behold, it was in the New York Times like a week ago that there is a possibility that it came from a lab. So it feels like we're not allowed to talk about things at the moment because the only thing we're allowed to talk about is the pandemic and whatever the government facts are.
But what are the ramifications, James? If you have a conversation and you step out and you say anything, like, am I being hauled off to a gulag? That's what I don't understand. I don't understand this hard stance on whether the left or the right, whether or not it just doesn't make any sense to me. There seems to be we want to put some sort of cap on this or names. We got to be able to have a conversation. I don't want to feel like I can't have a conversation. What happens to you? Nothing.
Okay. No, but it happened in this conversation. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude about it, but the thing about putting people in a box or hearing someone say something and then labeling them. I mean, the yellow vester question came out of nowhere for me because I was just like, I've had David Duke retweet an article of mine. Does that mean I'm a member of the KKK? It's cheap. And we have that tendency and that habit to be cheap with each other and pretending that we're making some glamorous point, but we're not really making any point at all. Someone happens to agree with you who's repugnant. Fucking Hitler was a goddamn vegetarian. Oh, fuck, we better all eat meat. Like, it's a little ridiculous.
Karima?
I think that's pretty intellectually dishonest. I think that if you look into it, again, looking at the websites, the signs, the comments people are making, there is very clearly, and not exclusively, but very clearly a thread of white supremacy that is evident in
so they agree
in libertarianism. In libertarianism,
so that makes Randy what an exacerbator of white supremacy? Because
I asked how he and whether he interrogates his position based on them espousing it, because
and I think that's a fair question. I think
it's not a fair question because it has nothing to do with Randy's beliefs.
Well, she's not saying it has anything to do with Randy's beliefs. I believe Karima was just simply asking, listen, you get a lot of white supremacists that show up, and I think you addressed it, James. That a lot of white supremacists are libertarians because they fucking hate everybody. They hate the government. They think the government's out to take their guns. It's that kind of person, right?
Right. A lot of lefties are communists. Communism, was responsible for untold millions of deaths. But I mean, we don't ask lefties about that really.
No, but Karima was just asking. I know, but Karima was what she was saying is how do you justify that? Like, how does that make you feel?
Why does he have to justify it?
I think the important thing is you come to a conversation. I've never met you before, Dean. I've never met Lachlan. I've never, I've.
But you like me.
Well, listen, I'll talk with anybody, regardless of race.
He skirted that one.
Of creed or color or anything else. Like, I'll talk with anybody that wants to have a conversation.
Right.
If you want to say, well, I can't have a conversation because that guy's white or that guy may have guns and therefore he's also a redneck in a white supremacist because he owns guns. Well, like that's not going to be a good conversation. And I think and because I may have a friend who's a lefty, or whatever it is. Let's talk about the substance of the matter and not the bullshit that confuses and creates this fog and this mistrust and this animosity.
That's a good point. We are getting bogged down in a lot of the details, right? And everyone's on edge.
So okay, so I don't.
Did I mention I want to drink?
Well, I want to have a beer too, but it's not because
why,
of this conversation.
why am I thinking that both
I
of
always
you
want to
have
have a
alcohol
beer
within arm's reach of each other? Seriously.
And I'm going to say maybe the next time we want to have this conversation,
let's get drunk.
You drive up to Lanark County. I've got a big deck. I've got a big table. It's at least 6 feet long and at least 6 feet wide. We can sit around on the back deck, have a beer. You can be socially distanced. I don't care if you wear a mask or not. Might have trouble drinking the beer, but I'll enjoy the conversation with you.
So, and that is that's the nature of this conversation, right? Is that we're talking because traditionally everybody on that side hates everybody on this side, and they're not worth the time. I can't tell you how many DMs I got, emails, tweets, text messages. Why would you put that? Why would you give Randy Hillier time? And my answer was probably James's answer. It's marketplace of ideas. Like if we're gonna have that conversation, we might as well start having the fucking conversation. As
James
opposed
likes
to
stirring
saying,
the fucking pot too, though.
He loves it.
Fuck you, Lachlan. Fuck you.
But we're having that conversation, right? And all the narratives of. And I actually appreciated Karima's question. In the narratives of white supremacy, why does it work? We're trying to figure that stuff out. Listen, this is a long life or a short life, depending on whether or not you wear a mask. But at least we could do. The very least we could do is try to become better people as we get a little bit older. To try to become better people, more informed individuals who are able to understand what's happening and help people around them. Now listen, you're helping the people that believe the same thing you believe, right? This conversation, whether or not you believe what I believe or whether or not you believe what Randy believes, should also be taken as an opportunity for you to be able to put more quivers in your intellectual arrow. Not for you to go, I'm fucking going to take that side because I think the same thing as that guy. That's the cheapest way to live. It's the worst way to live, to say, you know what I'm going to side with that guy because I believe in God. Fuck that. I happen to believe God doesn't exist. In fact, I don't think Jesus rose from the grave because that's impossible to me. And so then I don't put any stock in anything anybody says from that side of it. And then I get angry. And then I'm like, fuck, we're not having a conversation about it anymore. But we just legitimately had, an hour plus long conversation, which is still going, and I appreciate it, about what the issues are and where do we start talking about how we can all decide, hey, enough, right? Enough of the bullshit. Enough of the hardcore stances, enough on both sides. Let's try and sit and listen and talk about how we're going to get past this and be societal again. How we're going to actually walk up to a guy like Randy who believes something completely different than I do, or Karima who believes something completely different than you do. All of us here are different. We've all got our conversations and our bailiwicks, and we've all got people we're trying to protect, right? I've got 3 boys who I love more than anything, 21, 17, and 15. All of them have suffered severely from the mental impact that has gone on with this. Some of them have had to get medication. Some of them have had to go to doctors. And you know what I say to them? We're still doing the right thing. And sometimes I think, are we? Are we still doing the right thing? Am I making sure that my kids are safe from this thing at the cost of their mental health? And that's a conversation we're going to continue to have. We're going to continue to talk about these things because those are the personal things that matter to me.
But I also will say this. You know, you said that we have a tradition of having that conversation, and that tradition has been severely impugned in the last period of time. But we have had a long tradition, and that has helped us resolve the great crises of mankind and humanity is through that discussion, and we've thrown it away. So listen, there's nobody who hasn't faced some level of suffering and injustice in the last year. Mm-hmm. There's a great deal of it. I don't think it's being properly and fully understood and examined. And you know, as somebody who has 4 adult children and have 6 young grandchildren, I fear that their future is looking very, very bleak as we continue down this path. Now, I don't know where the path will eventually take us to, but I do know that the path will be determined by our conversations and our discussions. And if we can't have that, we are going to be in a very bleak place in the future for my grandchildren and yours, and everybody's is going to be far, far less than what we've enjoyed in life. And you know, I just, you know, we need to get away from this, you know,
vitriol.
She said, this vitriol, this animus, this intellectual dishonesty and laziness of putting a label on somebody because we don't like them, or we attach a label because we can't be bothered to think beyond a slogan or a soundbite. And that's been a hallmark of politics for a long time. It's also become a hallmark in our media and now in our public health, that we are thinking in slogans and speaking in sound bites instead of examining the subject that needs to be examined.
Are you open to being wrong about this whole thing?
Listen, I've always, you know, I can't begin to tell you how much I read about COVID, okay, and how much I examine it. And has my view altered to different degrees, varying degrees, as evidence comes available? I think we all, you know, evidence guides us along with our perspectives and along with our moral compass. But listen, if some other study that came out, or you know, or if there was some, you know, if evidence made me to reconsider, I would reconsider, and I'd come to a conclusion as honestly as I could based on the evidence that is available.
Think you can leave God out of it?
Well,
just a question.
Listen,
I just want to know when he brought God into it.
That would be like me saying,
I did.
Dean, can you not just put God in you for a few moments?
No, because I don't believe he exists.
Okay, so listen, I don't care about what your beliefs are. Okay, you know, I think you're a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm not going to judge you in any less or greater stature because of what you believe or don't believe.
Yeah, I get that part of it, but
so why would you do that to me?
Well, I'm not. I'm asking you if you can, because science has no place in religion, none. And if the science is telling us this is bad and we're seeing people die, that means I can't agree with that perspective. And so, yeah, and we're talking about science. We're talking about a disease. We're not talking about faith.
Well, Dean, I never brought up faith. You
I did.
have.
Yeah.
You have.
Because I think it's central to a lot of people who don't believe that this is an issue.
Everything that I've stated is the facts from the data and the evidence that I've read. Okay?
Right.
That's what I've stated.
Okay.
So
I think it might be worth noting too that libertarians are often Christians, and Christians are often libertarians, and conservatives are often one of the two. And so libertarians, obviously, but so it's like there is overlap between the faithful and the people that don't believe that this is as serious as it is. I'm not sure if that's a direct link from Jesus to not believing in COVID, or if it's being conservative and libertarian and not believing. But I don't think I would be tempted to sort of blame, especially for Randy. Randy, I'm sorry, I didn't even know you believed in God until just this second, because you never really gave any evidence of it when you were flipping people off in the house, right?
No. So listen, I think where my faith.
By the way, I like that move.
Where my faith comes into this, in my view, and maybe others would challenge me on this, but where my faith comes into this is my compassion and understanding of the harm that we're doing to others, and that we need to take stock of that, and we need to limit that harm and have compassion for.
Can you not use the same argument for if and listen, I'm only asking this question because it came into my head, but can you talk about compassion for people, and that's why you feel the way you do, and I get that part of it. To do the Christian thing is an old statement, right? Do the Christian thing, but isn't the Christian thing to also have compassion for people who are scared and are wearing masks, or are taking this more seriously, or who do think it's a pandemic? Isn't that also, can't you transfer into that world as well?
Yeah, and I've come to the conclusion. I have come to a slightly different conclusion, Dean. It's a fair comment. My conclusion is that we should be doing things to help convey a proper understanding of the risk. And as political leaders, we should be doing everything possible to alleviate the fear within society and not to elevate it and stoke it. We need to,
I like the fear. I like the fear because I know how bad it is. And then I'm like, okay, I take it seriously.
No, but there was two parts of that. I said, to understand the severity of the risk, and it is different for different people and for different demographics. And we never hear that from our political leaders. Risk, risk is one word, but we know this in everything in life. Everything is a risk, everything, okay? But some risks are very minimal. Mm-hmm. Some are slightly more. Some are moderate. Some are high. And during COVID, we've never put that modifier, that adjective or modifier in front of the term risk. We've only ever communicated the risk without ever communicating the level of risk. Okay, It is, not to be cliche, but I think it's important. We know that there's a risk when you go in and take a drive, but it's a very minimal risk, and that doesn't prevent us from going out for a drive, right?
Why don't you tweet that stuff then?
Well, listen. Twitter. It's hard to have an intellectual conversation in 280 characters, and I don't.
240, and you can call Twitter a lot of things, but intellectual is not one of them, my friend.
That's right.
Randy, can I ask you a question quickly, because I just want to make sure that I understand something, or if this is even possible. We were talking about COVID deaths and COVID expedited deaths. I guess would you support, or would you ask the government to separate those categories so that the public can see?
They are.
Anybody
who dies with anything, it's on record. They've been maintaining those numbers from the beginning. So if you have AIDS, lupus, and cancer, you're on that.
You have to dig. Nobody I know knows what the expedited deaths are versus the COVID deaths. It's just the COVID deaths that people know. That's what's on the front page of the paper. So do you think if we started actually spotlighting the expedited deaths as much as we do the COVID deaths, that it would have a negative impact on the
Absolutely.
behavior?
We can't keep a clean message by just telling people to stay 6 feet away and wear a fucking mask.
Yeah.
We're in
But we're not
complete
giving all the
turmoil by
information.
sending those two messages. We're sending the most clear messages to the public, and everyone is fucking freaking out.
But those
I
aren't
don't
the
know
same
how
things.
saying, okay, by the way, last week, and I hear these numbers every day because every morning, 3 times a day, we read the COVID numbers, okay? We read 3 or 4 sets of numbers. Let's add more numbers in it. By the way, Johnny, Susan, and Harry also had fucking lupus. And
Okay.
Johnny, Billy, and Karen also had cancer. I mean,
I asked
that's
you
way
about
too
apples.
confusing.
I got to
I
tell you,
asked you
Locke,
about apples, and you're answering me about oranges. So
yeah,
what
I got to
really
tell
said-
you, I agree with James, and I think he's trying to ask Randy this question, which is, James, and I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to act as an intermediary here, is that, shouldn't they be specific to the malady as to how many maladies people have had? Like, would that help? According
just
to
data.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's so confusing. I don't think it helps at all.
I don't think it's confusing at all. Like, I think it's.
I think if
actually
we
more
want an
clear.
actual, exactly. I think if we want to get an actual reading and real time information, all that information needs to be included. I completely agree with you.
'Cause I
There's
don't think
35% of the
Lachlan-
population doesn't believe the numbers that are there
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah,
And
but
then you're
It
going to
doesn't
give them
matter.
more.
But you're
But
not giving out
Lachlan-
numbers for those people. You're giving out numbers for people who are fair minded that are on this phone call to be able
Yeah,
to say, okay, now
can't
we know.
retreat. We can't retreat and have all of our messaging sent only to the people who need the caution label on your apple pie at McDonald's. Caution, filling is hot. Like, we can't just be talking to those people. We need to be able
Right.
to say, okay, here's all the data. I guess if you're not very bright, you don't care about the data. And if you're a little bit bright, you care about it a little bit. And if you're really bright, you want to read the data set. Like,
But
I
your
wanna read
question
the
was
data.
whether or not that was going to help, and I'm telling you, I'm a firm no. That is just going to cause more problems. That's all I'm saying. Whether or not that
but why is
data
it gonna
is
cause more
available or
problems?
not is what's that? Sorry.
Is it going to cause more problems because people are dumb? Some people are dumb. Like, what is the reason it's going to cause more problems?
Because of the division, like where we're at right now, we can't agree on anything. Nobody
Just the
agrees on
data
anything.
is division.
Let me add a comment to that, because although a lot of the data is available, it's not really easy to disseminate and extrapolate. Like the data.
Yeah, to what James said, you got to dig.
You do have to dig.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem, there's a bigger problem because the data is there, but the bigger problem, I would say, is when the professionals, when the academics, and when the scientists dig into that data and come out with a revelation and a study, they don't have any platform to speak. So, like last night, one of the world's most esteemed professors and medical professionals, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, was censored on Twitter.
Is that the guy from Harvard?
Yeah, from Harvard. Professor Michael Yeadon, the former chief scientific officer for Pfizer, has been so attacked on social media. He no longer speaks of his dissenting views. Professors, I spoke with Professor Ronald Brown from Kitchener in Ontario last week about a peer-reviewed study that he did on the vaccine efficacy, and he can't be heard. You know, our media and our social media and ourselves are censoring any dissent. So I take your point, James, about, you know, I believe the data could be presented in a better fashion that would permit a greater number of people who had the inclination to examine it, make it easier for them to do so. And I think that would be good. But let's not forget, there are people that have dissenting opinions, like even the Great Barrington Declaration. One of the a marvelous from very 3 esteemed medical professionals was denigrated and was cast out. We had the former chief medical officer of health for Ontario, Dr. Richard Chabas, has come out and said lockdowns are causing more harm than good. And and he won't go on media. He was on media once, and he was trashed and vilified. It is an endless stream of examples of anybody who has tried to bring an element of nuance and context into the conversation has been demonized.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that answers my question earlier about what the cause is of speaking out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's speaking out about anything right now. It doesn't even need to be this. I mean, you have an opinion on something, and to what James has said, you're immediately called a Nazi or you're vilified. Randy, I'm interested in this because I got a lot of emails from people that believe what you believe or support you. Some of your supporters over the past year, telling me to off myself as well. Like it's both sides of the equation. You must get a ton of hate mail.
I think the cancel culture have given up on me, Dean.
You think so? No, but like, have you gotten something from a friend of yours? Because
you keep the funny ones.
Yeah. Tell me you've kept all the good ones. But you've had to have had some doozies. Like you've had to have had.
Oh, of course, but
that was when he was part of the Ford government.
Listen.
Are you guys friends? Are you and Dougie friend?
I've had people suggesting that I should be strapped down and my family should be strapped down and injected with COVID. So, I've had all kinds of miserable, hateful, vile things said. I grew up in an era where sticks and stones may break my bones, but names are not going to bloody hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't give a shit. If somebody doesn't
Randy, you did block me on Twitter once, remember? I had to get you to unblock me.
Actually, we've had people in the chat asking you to unblock them.
You were being a dickhead at the time, James.
No, I wasn't. I was leaking documents that put Vic Fideli's reputation in. You were still part of the Ford government, and you put me in my place.
That doesn't fit. James,
was Randy
dickhead,
a yes man? Was Randy a yes man when he was in the government? Is that what James is saying?
He didn't play nice with others according to the caucus leak.
Okay, please cut that out. Somebody listening, James was being a dickhead.
It's unbelievable. Also, that's one of the proposed names for my new podcast in a couple of months.
That's in the past. That's in the past.
That's in the past.
Yeah. But
fantastic.
This is what we, like that was a controversial time as well, James. Right. Mm-hmm. And you and I were on different sides of the equation.
Yep.
And we couldn't have a conversation at that time because each of us were righteous and noble, and each other was a demon and evil. And you can't have a conversation like that. So
are you a member of any party right now, Randy?
The only party that I'm a member of is the ones that are around my kitchen table or around the bonfire pit right at the moment.
The family.
That's right.
Are you going to join a party?
I have no idea what the future holds. I'm an independent.
You're doing a lot of stuff with Maxime Bernier. So,
I do things with other people from elected offices and others. It's nonpartisan, but elected people who are opposed to the lockdowns I work with. And some of them are conservatives, some of them are progressive conservatives, some are former conservatives, some are PPC, some are at the municipal level with no party affiliation as far as I know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to diminish my involvement with people because of a partisan stripe they may or may not have. That's
not a lot of people believe what you believe. So no matter where they're from, it would seem like any support would be good support. No?
Well, Dean, as you were saying that you're getting a lot of comments and a lot of people supporting my view, and I'm going to put.
No, I didn't say that. I said that your friends wanted to kill me.
Well, so
that was not a very healthy laugh, Randy.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
kind of scared me actually.
I know this is. I'm very confident saying this. There's a great many people who share my views,
and they're going to kill you, Dean.
And no, I don't think they will, and I'm certainly not going to encourage them. I would say don't. Dean's actually, even though he's an atheist, I still like
No,
him.
agnostic, totally agnostic.
Agnostic is just an atheist without any testicles, so don't worry about it.
So, what's that?
Can I steal that for a T-shirt?
I wanted to use that.
One too.
I wanted to use Mike Bullard's comment about snow peas in that regard. But there's a lot of people who share my views, but they are very reluctant, very hesitant to speak out on this. And fellas, I will say this: like, I have talked to many physicians, many police officers, many academics, many nurses, and without fail, they don't speak out because they fear the marginalization, the shaming, and even the potential loss of employment and jobs. And that's a strong indictment, I would say, on our society when professionals and when people are refusing to be seen and to be heard because of the shaming. We cannot ever get to a good place when we suffocate dissent, when we suffocate opinions and conversations.
Yeah, I agree. We can't. I also think that there's that we're not talking about bearing responsibility in a time like this to be able to make those hard decisions and look at your freedoms as not as important as the freedoms of the whole. That's what I get, because everybody's confused, right? Not just the people on the left or the right. And if you're an extremist on either end of those, I hate you. But we're talking about people who are scared, legitimately afraid. Because of where we're at, people who have lost their jobs, the human cost, which we've discussed many times, right?
Yeah, like, it's not that my freedoms are more important, but they are important. But
when you go to a store without a mask, isn't that kind of what you're saying?
No, not at all.
That's what people think.
Well, no, it's people who don't think. It's people who don't think. Like, let's obey the law. The law says that I or anybody else can have an exemption. Like, the law, look at the law in its entirety, not just in the one half of it that you like.
I don't see. That's
Randy,
the thing.
would you get rid of the,
I don't need a law.
Get rid of the religious exemption? And I only ask that because I have never heard of a religion that bans wearing facial coverings. I've heard of the opposite. But I've never heard, because that is one of the exemptions, is that if you can just claim it goes against your religious beliefs. I don't know about this religious.
I don't believe that's true, James.
It's true in my county.
Okay,
It's true in Renfrew County.
There are slight modifications and changes.
It's probably a provincial thing.
Yeah. Well, no, we don't have any provincial order. It's all from public health. So different public health or municipal orders may deviate slightly from one another. In my riding, there is no religious exemption whatsoever.
Okay.
There shouldn't be, because religion is a joke.
Yes.
Wow,
we agree on something.
I think that's
Dean, the bridge maker.
No, I think that's part of the sickness of our society.
Yeah,
where we denigrate and dismiss.
Well, but you know what? I grew up in it, and I've got a really intimate knowledge of how born again Christianity works. And the part that really doesn't jive with me is that mark of the beast baloney. And then the other part is how this faith that you have to have also includes the ability to not really appreciate the gay and lesbian community. Husbands, you're the head of the household, submit to your wives. That kind of stuff just doesn't jive with me. So that's why I don't subscribe to it.
I don't think, but the only thing that Randy would agree with is that atheists should go to hell. That's what the Bible says.
I look at it in a very, listen, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian. I didn't go to seminary school. None of that. Okay.
Something else we have in common.
But I think things like the Ten Commandments are good things. You know, that thou shalt not bear false witness, that thou shalt not steal, thou, you know, like there's a lot of good things. So to, you know, even if you don't like everything within a book, doesn't mean that there aren't good parts of the book, right?
It also is worth saying out loud, because I am not religious.
Yeah.
I don't think you need a book to tell you how to be a good person.
You know what's weird though? Some people do.
Well,
And I'm an atheist, and I still recognize that some people.
You know what an
use
atheist
religion
is?
in a good way.
An atheist is an agnostic with a vagina.
Cool. Nothing wrong
That's
with
not
that.
going to fit on the T-shirt.
I think that we have a guest here that would agree that that is a very sexist thing to say.
You know, but again, let's like we don't need to get sidetracked. Like there is a virus. Okay,
Yep.
that's something that we have all agreed on. There's
I'm really happy you say that.
Well, I've never said anything otherwise.
Kind of sounds
You
like
know,
People thought that when he said there's no pandemic that he was saying there was no virus. But
yeah.
I want to read something to you, and I'm really glad that Dave sent me this email. We just got this at deanblundell.com. Dean, I'm a longtime listener for back in the day. I may not agree with a lot of what you tweet regarding COVID. However, I must thank you for having Hillier on today. Good job, Randy. I was refreshed that you could all get around microphones, have a discussion about the greatest issue we've faced since World War II. I walked away from this broadcast with a new outlook from both sides. Thank you. I look forward to tuning in the future. Isn't that kind of what isn't that what we're doing here? Shouldn't this kind of stuff be happening more?
Absolutely. And that's wonderful to hear.
I think we achieved it. That's good.
I hope we can do, you know, that there can be more of conversations like that.
You can come on anytime.
Well,
I'll
let you digest this one before.
What are you doing? What are you doing for the rest? What does an MPP do for the rest of the day? Because I know you're dying to go home, grab a Bud Light, and sit on your patio.
I don't drink light beer.
What do you?
So
now you
drinking?
really fucking insulted him, Dean.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what the bulk of my day is on the phone, listening and speaking with constituents who are telling me their stories of despair and seeking my guidance and my advocacy to attempt to help them. And that's been the case since March 17th last year. You know, I've always felt it important as an elected representative to speak with my constituents and answer the phone and answer their inquiries. But I'm going to say to you, you know, if I talked, you know, to 5 people a day prior to March 17th, 2020, I speak to 50 a day since. And the level of despair and the level of harm, you know, it really is hurtful to see so many people in that position
Hurting.
And I think
it is. It's tough. It's tough. I mean, we've never been here before, right? And so to be in a place where, you know, it looks like we're going to try to vaccinate our way out of this thing. You know, and I'm all for, I'll take all the vaccines if it means I can go back to living my life normally, which is kind of what you were, you know, asserting to, is that, you know, you can still live your life normally in different ways. I don't agree. But it doesn't mean we have to be dicks to each other, right? It doesn't mean we have to call each other names and shit like that. It means that we got a chance to sit down and have a legitimate conversation about all the vitriol behind what you believe and what that portion of society believes. And it's always going to be left up to the worst case example, right? Like, you know, when we talk about the people on that side or this side, we talk about the worst case scenarios. But I've literally and thoroughly enjoyed sitting down, talking to you, and having everybody on this phone call kind of get it out, right? Because everybody's been repressed. This side of it's been repressed. The only way that we can get our shit out is seemingly to call, you know, anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers morons, and the other side calls the other bunch sheeple. right?
Yeah.
And that's fucking done. I'm tired of it. I'm exhausted. I'm so sick of it.
The
And
worst.
so to have a conversation like this where, you've got very well-educated, independent individuals around the table to talk about it, it means something. It means that I think that's a bit of a starting point for a lot of different people to be able to, speak their truth or ask questions. Because what we've done is, through this vilification process of treating people like shit because of what they believe, whether it's dangerous or not. And I happen to believe your opinion's dangerous, but I also happen to believe you should be allowed to explain it. And if we're going to fucking tell people that they're not allowed to talk or not allowed to put information out, then we're never going to be able to ask them questions like we asked to start this podcast, which is, Randy, how did you arrive at what you believe and why? And we started to get to the bottom of it. We got some great questions. You made some really good points. We found common ground in certain areas, like how fucked intergovernmental agencies are and how they're not looking out for the best interests of the people who are most at risk. We've talked about long-term care homes and how they have been screwed over, and the government, specifically in Ontario, has used them to drive a political narrative in the process, killing so many loved ones. We've dealt with those things. And I think that this is the starting point for a lot of those conversations, right? But that side needs to get over here. This side needs to come over here, and we need to stop calling each other assholes and threatening to kill each other. That's my opinion.
We should get some of those names that Randy mentioned too. That some of the names, well, James probably knows them too, but just the doctors and whatnot that have been suppressed and that we're trying to get the different opinions out and have them on.
Let me give you a couple right now that have been investigated by the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Ontario. Dr. Patrick Phillips, I did an interview with him, and he's under investigation. Dr. Kulvinder Kaur has been under investigation. Dr. Ash, Dr. Matt Strauss, Dr. Richard Chavez.
Some of those guys passed around misinformation, though. That's why they're under investigation. I know it's a lot of the names that you just talked about.
Well, let's,
why would passing around information that was false? Like, what if they didn't know it was false? Like, we've all probably tweeted something that might have been false.
Misinformation in a pandemic is a bit of a different thing, apparently. Yes, Randy, go ahead.
That's another label, and that's another term that's been widely used and slung around during COVID as well. And we've seen this. Anybody who has a different conclusion is also viewed as spreading misinformation, right? So, I would suggest you take we put out a video from the Canadian Health Alliance with a half a dozen doctors from around the country. It was immediately censored from YouTube as well. I was watching the Texas State Legislature the other day, and a professor and Dr. Peter McCullough was on providing testimony to the Texas Legislature Committee, which we are not permitting to happen here in Ontario. And he stated quite categorically that had we permitted treatments which were politicized early on, but we now know are effective, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, colchicine, there's a great number of treatments that were highly politicized because of who said it, Donald Trump, and
that witch doctor priestess. But let's not forget her.
Dr. Peter McCullough has stated, in his testimony to the legislature, that we could have reduced COVID fatalities by 85% in his considered opinion. He also believes that in Texas they're already at least 80% herd immunity, and we're not even being allowed to hear these other data sets, these other points, let alone be able to draw a different conclusion from what public health is.
So do you think, because every country, every single university, every single medical health authority across the world disagrees with that statement.
Say that again.
Disagree, you're talking about these doctors that aren't allowed to speak, right? And when I say disagrees with the statements that these doctors are making that have led to them being silenced, generally speaking, fly directly in the face of common practice. They fly directly in the face of what every medical health authority has said this virus is about, how to achieve herd immunity. And is it not entirely possible that a lot of those doctors have the same MO or want to drive the same narrative for reasons that have nothing to do with science? Because I know a couple of doctors that don't believe that the pandemic is real. And again, means nothing to you, but it is driven from a religious perspective. It is driven from the apologetics with which they have been taught to believe their faith. So like that overrides science in the religious community. It always does, specifically with born again Christianity, which some of these doctors that you're talking about are. So like what I'm saying is, isn't it entirely possible that their scientific judgment has been clouded by their faith in a lot of cases, which we've established is the situation? Not with you, because you say it plays a part, but isn't that entirely possible?
No, I don't think we should impugn the motive of people without even having any knowledge.
But if it's not science-based, then we go looking for motive, do we not?
No, but it is science-based. So at the beginning of this show, we talked about the WHO pandemic plan, okay? And we talked about how it wasn't followed. Like the idea of a powerful, comprehensive, complete lockdown is not science, okay?
Right.
That is something that is, for the very first time in human history, we've utilized. Okay, we threw out all of our known experiences, all of our known observations in history, and said we are going to try something new that's never been tried before.
But didn't it work?
And so I would say to you, like, these people, there's a great many people have this different view. The Great Barrington Declaration is signed by over 50,000 healthcare professionals and doctors around the world. Are they all crackpots? Are they all cranks? There's another 700,000 people of various academic and professional credentials who have signed on to the Great Barrington Declaration. Let's have an expectation. There's, I would say this, we should all recognize that COVID became highly politicized very, very early. Mm-hmm. And the politicization of COVID has been what has been the problem. We have not permitted science to be engaged. We have not permitted the public to be engaged. We've not permitted politicians to be engaged. It has become so politicized that I believe that we are doing things more for political purposes than for health purposes.
Mm-hmm. To what Locke was asking earlier too, right? Like, is it a political thing? And by and large, I just think that politicians in 2021 are much dumber than they were in 1950. So and much more out for themselves and tied into mainstream media. See, that's, again, we agree, Randy. I think big media in this country's full of absolute shit.
Listen, I'm going to say to you,
Dean, my show.
Yeah, I'm going to say to everybody, if you
they said big media.
If I want to have a good conversation,
you're calling me.
I don't go to the Legislative Assembly to have a good conversation. This is a good conversation. This is where people are thinking. They don't have a set of scripted talking points in front of them where they are only permitted to
tell?
say certain things. Yes, I can tell. even from this distance. Like we
I have "fuck off Lachlan" written twice on the sheet in front of me, actually. So
I have "fuck off James" 3 times.
We in the legislatures, we have often come down to that we have the NDP talking point, the conservative talking point, and the liberal talking point. And thank God we have some independent members in the legislature that are you know what? I've got to leave. I've got my missus calling me, and
you're in trouble.
Wow,
You spent too much time talking about things that don't matter. You have a great day. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Randy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There you go. That is Randy Hillier, MPP. Karima, how you doing up there?
I'm okay. That was something.
What do you mean something? What do you mean that was something?
Read into it what you will. That was something. I think that was a very interesting conversation.
I think we got to stop having people on that enjoy smoking as much as the last couple of guests. It's driving me fucking crazy. I quit in 2008, and this podcast, I swear to God, is going to get me smoking again. I am off to the store after watching him suck on that thing. I am off to the store to get a pack.
No, you're not.
Driving me nuts.
No, you won't.
Bullard, did you see him smoking?
Like a chainsaw.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he wouldn't stop. But
why am I twitching? It's been too many years.
Karima, you're an activist and a lawyer and a really good person. Did anything in there strike you as irresponsible? Or did we have a decent conversation?
I mean, I think there were things that he said. So, for example, we know that asymptomatic transmission is not a thing. I don't think we know that. No. I don't think we know that
true.
at all.
Yeah. Did he say it was not a thing, or did he say it was not as serious as we once thought?
No, he said
I'm pretty sure he said it's not a thing.
He said that there's no asymptomatic transmission.
Yeah.
He said there's none.
So again, I think that, there's agreement that the way the pandemic has been handled is if not criminal negligence, very negligent. But, as far as deferring to sort of the nonpartisan experts, and then really, I think if we're putting energy anywhere, it should be into policies that will sustain us through the whatever it is we're supposed to be doing. So things like paid sick days, or, ensuring that workplaces are kept safe, and it's you can't ask people to stay home when they still need to make rent and pay bills. That's just, there's some very logical solutions that, for whatever reason, the government is totally just bypassing those. And I think that's where, the real productive kind of
conversation should go.
Yeah.
Did you find him as offensive as we all thought he was?
I think that, I think he met my expectations. I wouldn't say that it was offensive, but there's a persona there, and I was not surprised at what we saw.
I think he's good. He's a politician. He's good at avoiding the conversations that he knows that are going to get him into trouble. Like, he definitely did not want to go down the reset conversation. He definitely didn't want to go. And you dragged it out of him. He didn't want to dance the religious, because just brings hypocrisy into it.
I've been dying to ask that question of someone in this movement, because it is intrinsically involved in that perspective.
Well, and
God is the
also
answer to the disease, and the vaccine literally is the mark of the beast. I was going to continue to ask him if he felt that way, if the vaccine was the mark of the beast, but I thought I got enough, right?
Cross-examination. You got to know when is enough.
Is that the deal? Is that what I did?
Yeah, no. You never ask the extra question. Just let it be, and then you make your point.
James?
I thought listen. I thought. I was telling the truth. I didn't know he was religious until today. I didn't think his answers were surprising when you asked him about it. I think that I would agree with you that there is certainly the demographic that seems to be the most hardcore anti-COVID or anti-mask, whatever you want to call it, they often do have a religious bent. But his answers, I thought, were actually pretty good for those questions because
but I also think it's important to bring it up too, though, James.
Because
it's not.
I just want to know,
Karima's conversation. Why is there 10% of the crowd wearing a yellow vest? Right.
Yeah, I think that was a good question, but that's just
okay.
Me,
that's for another day.
I thought that was a hyperbolic question. I thought that would be like asking Jagmeet Singh if he's comfortable that Sikh terrorists support him. That's as I think it would just be as you would have if you asked Jagmeet Singh a similar question, it would be, are you comfortable with Sikh terrorists supporting you?
I don't,
because they do.
Because
they do.
Yeah, I can't see that. I can't see that being equivalent because
they vote for Jagmeet. It's even worse.
Well,
these guys are going to.
Do you know that? Do you know that Sikh terrorists only vote for Jagmeet Singh because he's Sikh?
I know that Sikh terrorists do vote for him. There are Sikh terrorists that vote for him.
How many Sikh terrorists do you know?
Excuse me?
Like how many?
I guess I know about as many terrorists personally as you know yellow vesters personally, probably.
I don't know any of both groups.
Obviously, you don't have a fun friend crowd, Lachlan. So
I'm regretting not bringing.
I just thought it was a guilty by association kind of question, and I just
but dude, like I think that's a legitimate concern.
I agree.
Like a lot of the fucking people that we see,
he needs to be concerned about that following because they're rampant supporters of him.
So what's he going to do? So say he believes in what he believes.
Question whether here's what he does. He's supposed to question whether or not he's on the right side with that question, with Kareem's question. Like
I don't
should.
Know. So that's
someone who's mentally deficient enough to be a white supremacist agrees with you. I would immediately go, what do I believe and why? And maybe I need to recalibrate.
So you don't think that there's any really awful people that vote for other people? Like liberal or NDP? No,
I'm saying what Karima was asking was a legitimate question in regards to, does it make you fucking uncomfortable? So many of the yellow vest Proud Boy dickheads think you're their hero because they do.
I always talk about voting Green Party as a protest vote. I've actually had people that support the Green Party that email me and contact me that say, please stop telling people you vote for the Green Party.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Locke, I think every party would probably give you that phone call. If you,
okay, fair. Touche.
Guys,
we can agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not gonna continue having that conversation to convince you. I agree with a lot of the things that everybody in this table and everybody around this call said today. Listen, if we can find a way for Kareem Assad, Dean Blundell, Lachlan Cross, James DeFiore, and Randy Hillier to go, yeah, we agree on a couple of things. We get it. It's a good day. That's we had a decent conversation with one of the most hot button guys for that part of the movement, thanks to James. And because James said,
showrunner.
The showrunner. James said, why are we going to discount ideas? This should be the marketplace of ideas. I stole that from James because I think he's right. Listen, I talk a big game and I post a big game, but when it comes down to it, the bottom line is I want to know more, right? I want to get to inside the movement and the mind so I can understand it because I am on the other side of the world when it comes to guys like that. I do not agree with his opinion. I want to know why he believes what he believes. I want to know how he got there. I said that in the tweet today. We're not going to sandbag the guy. We're going to talk about how he got there, right?
I think he has zero regrets about doing this too. Right? I think it was a good conversation.
He smokes at work. Do you think he gives a shit about anything?
No, but you know what? He'll have conversations like this. I think that's what his hope is. He would die to go on CBC and have a conversation that was like this.
But they won't.
They wouldn't fucking do this on CBC.
You're giving a bad man a platform. All that stuff.
I'll give all kinds of bad people.
And
platforms.
that's interesting because that's what I was trying to get out of him. Like, what's the problem? Why are you so ramped up about your position and not? And it is, we are being censored, and it's happening at all levels. He does have a point about that. I mean, I've even said this. I didn't agree with the idea that it's been refreshing. They should not have taken Trump off Twitter. I disagree with it wholeheartedly. Like, I hated that man. I despised everything that came out of his mouth. But the fact that they took him off Twitter, I thought it's criminal.
I thought that was one of the most legit bannings, and not because I hate him, which I do, but because his tweets weren't just offensive. They were actually inciting people to do things that they shouldn't have been doing. And he's the president, right? Like, that's a different story.
Yeah.
If it was just some CEO doing it, I'd be like, okay, well, why would you ban that guy? But he's the president of the United States with 80 million followers telling people to go fight at the Capitol. Might be a good reason to get banned.
And they do. And people die.
They do. Yeah. I mean, that was ultimately why he ended up getting banned. But why is he not back on? Right? Like,
well, because you're going to do it again.
That's just a bonus.
Yeah. I personally, you talk about refreshing. I'm so fucking happy that Knob's not on Twitter anymore because I'm on Twitter a lot. Right. And every time I would see something, I would go, oh, for fuck's sakes. Like, that's how I get.
You know what he said a year ago?
For fuck's sakes.
A year ago yesterday, I saw on my Facebook thing, my Facebook memories, that he right at, what are we, March 30th? He tweeted a 3-tweeter all about his ratings for his press conferences. Like,
hey, Karima, kind of missed that a little bit.
When you can't do it in one, do a 3-tweeter. Right?
Was it all caps? Because
when's the last fucking time
the word
you've ever
ratings was in
tweeted
all
3
caps.
tweets?
Only the word ratings was in all caps?
I don't know. I'm going by memory.
Oh, shit. Karima Saad, sadvocacy.com is where you can find Karima. Just want to ask you.
Is that a pun?
No.
It's a portmanteau, actually.
Oh.
Hello. Yes. Hello. Pardon me, Karima. Hello.
Yeah.
La, 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 la.
But not only a wonderful lawyer and a friend of ours, but she also has a podcast coming to the network, ladies and gentlemen. What are you right here? Karima Saad is joining DeanBlundell.com, and I couldn't be more excited. What is the Karima podcast? What are you calling it? What are you talking about? Talk to me.
So the name is still a work in progress, but I think the idea is going to be sort of a mix of having different people on, but what do people not know they need to know? So that's the basic premise, and I'll be talking to different experts and professionals, not necessarily in a profession, but across a range of different careers. Just what do you not know that you need to know? So hopefully getting some good information out that way.
You gonna have a wrestler on?
If I hope.
We're gonna get a wrestler.
She's got a wrestling book behind her.
I do. I'm ready. I had someone actually. Well, I don't know if I can say this. Anyway, I had someone with like the name of a wrestler call me, and I was like, "Oh my god!" But it was just someone with his name. So it was a disappointing call.
Just a different Bret Hart.
I went to high school with Andrew Martin, who was Test, who unfortunately passed away a bunch of years ago. Yeah. The first thing I ever heard come out of his mouth, he was a very vile person when we were in high school, and he was also 6'6" and like 2-something pounds. And I was walking with my buddy Scott Smith. This is the first day of grade 9, actually. He was in grade 10, but we thought he was a teacher because he was so big. And me and Scott Smith are walking by, and he goes, "Hey, Smitty, how would you like it if I cummed in your face?" First thing I ever heard that guy say, and then I was like,
"How do you have that memory?"
And then he was the inventor.
He's in the fucking 9th grade and a giant.
How would I not remember that? And then like a year later, he was the inventor of the sky dump. Because I was on the football team and he was on the football team, and he straddled the stall and went to the bathroom and made everyone look. And I quit the team. It was awful.
So yeah, Karima loves wrestling.
Sorry.
Yes. No. I that's good trivia.
Hey, you can put that on your next one. Things you need to know. Who invented the sky dump?
Hold on. I'd like to point out you're the fucking one who brought up shitting today. Not
sorry.
me.
It was wrestling
Okay.
related. It was
Dean.
wrestling related.
What?
He brought up shitting today, not me.
Yeah,
He's always
Yeah,
the
but
at-home
I-
pooer.
Is this a
I have a
recurring
reason.
issue, or?
It is. Yeah,
I have
James
a
has
reason, though.
IBS.
I had therapy today, and I was going to pivot from shit to my stepmother again. So that was the plan. But then you went and ruined it. So
I got to read this text because we were talking about the tweet. Or we were talking about the interview. Like, hey, we prepped all weekend. All of us did. And, you know, yeah, you could tell you did. You could tell you looked down at some things. You're trying to be a tough guy. I know you prepped. But we prepped.
Don't put that on me.
And so one of the things, and James brought it up, is don't get emotional, right? Because this is an emotional fucking topic. And I'm like, yeah, good. Don't get emotional. And then James says, I just got back from an hour at the psychotherapist, so I'm good.
I did see that too. I did point that out mentally. He doesn't want us to get emotional. By the way, I'm off to my therapist. I'll see you in 2 hours.
well, all my tears are gone for the day, my friend. It's all good. And Karima, I just want to let you know that if you felt that I was snappy at you, that's only because I probably was a little bit, but I still like you a lot. Like, so please don't judge me for that one exchange.
Oh, we needed to do that. Thank God.
She takes down much bigger fish than us for a living,
I'm just
sir.
trying to be polite. That's all.
I really appreciate that. That's super nice of you. Well, I'm happy that this went well, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. Karima Saad at Karima Rules on Twitter. Her comic books are, her comic strips. Do you call them strips or animations? What do you call them?
Editorial comics.
They're fucking awesome.
Thank you.
And what you have to do is go to at Karima Rules to get all that information and have a look at some of her work. Hopefully you can bring that with you when you come here too. But we're really excited that you're going to be joining DeanBlundell.com. Thanks, Karima. Sadvocacy.com. Lachlan Cross, 95.7 Cruise FM. You get in trouble with your boss today? You good?
I actually did. We don't need to bring it up though. We can just move on.
All right. Well, appreciate you being here too. 95.7 Cruise FM in Edmonton, the locker room. He is the namesake of the best morning show in the city. Really appreciate you being here, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And my man, James DiFiore. God bless you. Thanks for setting that up. Conduit to that part of the world, and we really, really appreciate it. Blackballmedia.ca is the name of James's website, and it's named that for a reason. It's because you can't get a gig on mainstream media anymore. So
stuck with you.
Don't worry. I could probably port the name, and it would mean just as much if my thing was
they
called.
haven't canceled you just for having me on your show. So
well, that makes three of us. I can't fucking believe I'm got a job.
Yeah, well, take it easy. Blackballmedia.ca.
You stop sending tweets to my fucking boss. That's what I need.
Dude, he tweeted me first, and I tweeted him back.
No, just stop. You're not helping.
So he got in trouble last week for something, and then he talked about it, and then his boss sent an email or a tweet and attached it to me, and he's like,
Dean
something about it.
I'm like, Grant's like, Dean's on this tweet thread. I'm like, oh fuck.
Was your boss mad about cock talk with Locke? Is that what it was?
No, it wasn't anything to do with that. But then Dean says something along the lines like, hey, nice work licking your boss's butthole. And I'm like, oh shit.
He was, because he got in trouble. He was kissing his boss's ass on Twitter.
I was totally kissing ass.
And my point is, don't lick the guy's ass. And then your boss said something back to me. I'm like, I don't have to lick your ass. I don't work for you. Locke has to lick your ass.
Not
I
helping.
don't have to lick your ass. Yeah.
Not helping.
Appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you very, very
That was
very
fun.
much.
That was a good one
Thanks.
today.
Appreciate it. Lachlan Cross, James DiFiore, Karima Saad, wonderful people. What did I learn today? A lot. Probably should be less harsh. People of dissenting opinion. Probably shouldn't wish for people's death if they don't agree with what you think. You can still have fun, but you don't need to be an asshole, right? Appreciate MPP Randy Hillier being on the show. Whether you agree with anything the guy says or not, at least he showed up. And I give him full marks for that. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our friends over at Blue Microphones, the DeanBlundell.com podcast network, brought to you by Blue Microphones, part of the Blue Crew. We're the Blue Network, Blue Mike blumike.com is where you go to find everything that they make that they can send you so you can sound like you know what you're doing. MoFi headphones, get those. That's what these are. I absolutely love them. Grammy award-winning headphones, the Yeti X mic, USB charged, super easy. Just plug it into your computer. It's got the preamp on the inside. They have all kinds of stuff like this. So if you're into producing content like this, blumike.com or at Blue Microphones on Twitter. Speaking of content, domination.com, our partner in production, dmntn.com. If you want to produce stuff and you got no time to be able to come up with promos and bits and bytes, go to domination.com, try it for free, guaranteed you'll love it. dmntn.com is the name of the website. Ed at Ed's Fine Imports. Thanks to Ed for his Gitch. You can get his Gitch right now. You order 3 pairs, you get the 4th one for free. Whew. When you use promo code GITCH3, it's that easy. You just pump it into the promo code thing when you're buying 3 pairs of Gitch. You send you a 4th for free. Luxury underwear and their boxer briefs. Hang on, I got it right here with the pouch in the front. See those? Incredible. They're your top prospect, kids. Gitch from Ed's Fine Imports. .com. Order them today. He'll send them to you. And, of course, Black Rose Organics, better medicine at a better price. Go to DeanBlundell.com's YouTube page and watch an interview with the good people from Black Rose. We announced our partnership yesterday. We've got more information and a bunch of cool stuff to tell you about. If you're in the cannabis game, if you love the plant, if you look at it as a medicinal thing or recreational thing, it doesn't matter. We're going to help you get some relief and change your life. Black Rose. Is it blackrose.ca? BlackRoseOrganics.com. That's the name of the website. Anyway, thanks to our friends at BlackRoseOrganics.com. And thanks to you for watching. Thanks for being part of this as well. Don't forget, sign up for our newsletter at DeanBlundell.com. Have a wonderful day, everybody. I will see you tomorrow with Danko Jones. Ooh, that Danko Jones. The hard rockin' Danko Jones. Canadian rock legend Danko Jones. Tomorrow, right here on the program. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you, I don't know, another time. Bye.
I'm fascinated by this whole story.
This is June 2017.
And I'm getting drunk.
Yeah.
We drink during these shows, some of us.